confirmed open.
Okay, members, thank you. And we have quorum, and good morning to you all, and take the opportunity to wish everyone a happy new year and a happy and healthy new year. Call the meeting to order and welcome all of you to this, our first meeting in 2025. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available there in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no photographs or recording are to be taken, please. Can I ask members remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones here in the room. And finally, I would remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Do any members of any interest wish to declare? Andy?
Private sector landlord and charity trustee chair.
Yep, thank you. Melissa?
And I'm a member of the APG and gambling.
Yep, thank you, Melissa. Brian?
I'm a member of the APG and gambling as well.
Thank you. And I'm also a private sector landlord and a charity trustee as well. So thank you for that, members. Clerk, aware of any members? I believe we have one member on Zoom today, is that correct?
Daniel's hasn't joined yet, but has asked for the link.
Yeah. Okay, members, then, in terms of Chair's business, in relation to our decision before Christmas to rescind the Committee Motion on Welfare Reform Mitigations, members, this needs to be considered formally as a separate agenda item, so we will add it to next week's agenda, meeting agenda for consideration and for the record, if members are content. Members, I also wish to inform you that I had an informal meeting with the Department Permanent Secretary and a couple of his senior officials on Tuesday to discuss the need to improve the flow of timely information and communications between the Department and the Committee. The Perm Secretary is keen for officials to work collectively with the Committee. They are due to brief the Committee at the meeting on the 30th of January and have asked if a closed session may allow for a more candid discussion on the priorities for the Committee and for the Department going forward. And I'm content enough that could be a productive way to address those issues if members are content.
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, members, is draft minutes, which I refer you to there in your meeting pack there. It's our meeting of the 12th of December, and they're at page 6 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the draft minutes of 12th December as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. So, matters arising, members, then, and you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising there at page 19 of your pack. I intend to go through these replies in groups, and I would ask if you could highlight anything from the responses in those sections. There are more than 30 responses under matters arising today, and we have had responses on some issues that we have previously asked questions about. So I would ask that you highlight issues you want to discuss using the numerical reference as we go through these in chunks. I'm also conscious that the size of the pack for this meeting was huge, and that there are important items within it in both matters arising and potentially in correspondence, which members may prefer to request are brought back for further or more substantive discussion or briefing. Please highlight these for discussion again using the references as we go through, and there are a few of them that I will reference as well that I think are best put back on next week's pack for further consideration. So members, in terms of the matters arising from 4.2 to 4.6, are there any items within that members wish to discuss further? Or are members content with items? Go ahead, Kelly.
4.6, I've noted there that the officials are keen to ensure that cross-departmental actions are effectively monitored. Now, we've heard from the Minister before that his department won't be responsible for monitoring the work of other departments. If we're meeting with officials on the 30th of January, can we ensure that that's added to it? Because I just am not clear if another department, say for instance health or education, are bringing forward something in relation to anti-poverty strategy, how we as this committee will be able to monitor their actions.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Members content with that? Ciara?
I suppose just to comment on the responses back in 4.2 from the local councils. I think obviously we appreciate those responses back, and I suppose it's just important for us when we do meet with NI Water that we do bring forward those concerns that have been raised by the local councils, bring them forward.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Ciara. So, members content with 4.2 to 4.6 then? Yeah. Moving on then to 4.7 to 4.11. Any items within that that the members wish to discuss or raise? Kelly,
If I could, it's under 4.9 and it relates to something that we will come up to later in the agenda. With regards to the Gambling Act, the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Act that was put through the committee in the last mandate, would it be possible if we could get a request, a breakdown of the Act and an update of all of the actions completed to date by the department, just so that we can ensure that our post-legislation scrutiny is being followed up? It also would just help to clarify what all has been moved forward and what hasn't.
Yeah. Members content?
And just, I'd like to make the point here, and just in relation to the discretionary grants and the renovations that would be expected to take place, we're being met with the same criticism that existed before in relation to the standard of work and that carried out and that as well too. And I think that's something that should be maybe brought to the attention.
Which item?
Which number is this in there?
It's
411.
411, yeah.
Right, where's
Yeah,
it? Right.
thanks,
Okay.
Melissa.
And that, again too, we should be just highlighting this, you know, that not only are we talking here about the waiting times, but also the standard of work that's carried out by these, or this new contract that's meant to be carrying out a lot of this work now for the Housing Executive.
Yeah. You content, Claire, with the
Is there a follow-up
request?
question
Yeah,
then?
what's the
Is there a
frame of the
follow-up
question?
request?
I would like to maybe get a wee bit of clarity from the executive, given that they were the very people that had, they were aware of the incompetence of their previous subcontractor as such, so that what in fact are they doing to address these issues now as they emerge once again for many of their tenants?
How are they monitoring the quality
Yeah.
of the work carried out? Is
Yeah.
that the? Or
I'm
is it?
with you. Okay, thank you.
Kira?
Just in relation to 4.8, obviously the department's reply regarding the anti-poverty strategy and likewise the active aging strategy. So obviously we welcome that we will be provided with an update at the end of the month. Just in relation to the active aging, the Minister has asked officials to set out options way forward. I suppose I would just be keen that as a committee, once those options are laid out and the Minister has considered them, I would be keen to get an update on them, whether that's a written update, and likewise, is there a timeline going to be attached to the recommendations that come through?
Yeah. Members content with the suggestion? And Claire,
Yep.
you have the detail? Kelly?
Just going to go back to 411, Melicia's point about following up on the type of quality of work that's being delivered. I'm a little bit concerned about the department's discussion on the Disabled Facilities Grant. Clearly they've gone to Shelter and Radius to ask for information. They've only highlighted those that have made an official report on issues to do with their disability or Disabled Facilities Grant. I would have thought it would have been much better to do almost like, as Melissa has talked about, with the quality of work that's being done. It's the same with the Disabled Facilities Grant. It's the how each person who has had a Disabled Facilities Grant feels about it, because there's a lot of people quite uncomfortable going back to complain. I've had several cases in my area that I've dealt with that, to be honest, I don't have permission to talk about specifically, but no harm. There needs to be a very clear understanding of how the impact has had on people that receive Disabled Facilities Grant. The process requires them to be project managers in a field that they know nothing about, and they're left to it, to be honest. I think that we need to ask the department, why have they not done a customer survey with the Housing Executive for all of those recipients, rather than just picking out the ones who have had the courage to come forward and make complaint.
Claire, can you just check, are you
Yeah,
content
so
with
is
the
committee
framing?
content? Yeah. Part of that was to the Housing Executive in terms of inquiring with each person who's received the Disabled Facilities Grant, and the other question is to the department in terms of undertaking a customer assessment of their experience of the grant. Yeah.
Yeah, and if members can just identify the item they're addressing in terms of numbers and go ahead.
It's just following up on that 4.11, and I'm conscious there is an ongoing review. Because I'm not aware of the terms of reference of the review, I would be keen, just to ask the question as part of the review, an analysis across GB and elsewhere of home improvement agencies and what other additionality and additional work that they do, because I am conscious, and I have mentioned it before, myself and Melissa, you were there, and some other MLAs were there, in relation to Gable itself, that it does additional work to support people that remain in their home, and it's lower threshold work, and they work very closely with the likes of the Department of Health. And I know I have spoken to members of OTs, etc., and they see that as a vital service, and it's really smaller, low-level support work, not so much the disabled facilities grant, you know, the larger grants. So it's just within the terms of reference, are they exploring home improvement agencies and other additional projects and work and lower threshold work that could be considered as part of this review, and it's not just the disabled facilities grant.
Yep.
And have you seen the terms of reference? Is
I haven't.
committee
You see that?
requesting the terms of reference?
Well,
then?
if that could be provided, yes, that would be useful. Yeah.
Okay.
Members content?
Agreed.
Ryan? Yeah.
Chair, on a different matter, just a touch with Morris Bradley there. He's saying he can't get logged on, and would it be possible for someone to resend the log on details to him? Is that
Yes.
okay? Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks, Brian. Okay, members, so otherwise content then with 4.7 to 4.11. Yeah. So moving on then to 4.12 to 4.16. So are there items within that members wish to draw out or comment upon? 4.12 to 4.16. No, members, go ahead, Kelly, yeah.
I was thinking there, because there's something that about the winter fuel payments that's answered in the detail, but can I just double check if we can find out if the 414, if the land-based gambling organisations includes the National Lottery, given the fact that it's based in England?
Land-based gambling organisations includes
National Lottery.
national.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other items, members, within 4.12 to 4.16? Members otherwise content? Thank you. Just in terms of item 4.16, members, if they wish to receive a departmental briefing on the welfare supplementary payment scheme, I wonder would members want to seek a briefing on that? Yeah. Yeah. Members content? Thank you. Items then 4.17 to 4.21, members within that block. Are there any items that members wish to comment upon or raise issues with? 4.17 to 4.21, Kelly.
The department has highlighted in 4.18 potential underspend. Now they do say that they expect it to be spent by the end of the year, but we're in January now, and the figures go up to the I think it was the 6th of December of £4.14 million on the affordable warmth scheme. Can we get, if they're coming to see us in January, perhaps if we can ask them to detail if that underspend has been dealt with. I'm just concerned at this late stage of the year how they expect 4.14 million to be spent so late on.
Yeah, especially with warmth and heating being such an issue for people. Ciara, is this on the same one?
No, it's in relation to.
So, sorry then, just to get members' agreement that we flag that for the.
Yeah, for discussion on the 30th.
Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
thank you. Ciara?
It's just in relation to 4.18, and I welcome the detailed response to a number of issues. Just a few, just under the 4.18. Particularly in relation to, which I welcome, obviously, the modelling estimates for the decarbonisation of the residential sector that's currently being undertaken, and advice is expected to be delivered in early 2005. So it would be useful to get an update once that has been brought forward to the department. And just in relation to 2.7 of 4.18, it's particularly in relation to the department has been working with the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Association, which is very much welcome, in relation to the potential of a pilot 5-year project for decarbonisation and retrofitting a property. So I would be keen, once that comes, is there a timeline set in relation to when that will be completed, that proposal, and if we could receive a briefing once that work is completed on that. And I think, no, that's fine. Just them two areas for updates once that work is undertaken would be useful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are members content? Yeah. Melissa?
Just 420, that we welcome just the Minister's response there in relation to the Irish Language Strategies Co-Design Group, and I would like to get an update on that from the Minister once that he has actually met with the Co-Design Group as well.
Okay, thank you.
Update from the Minister following his meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Members content? Thank
It's
you.
just on Chair 4.19, it's just really to ask about the progress of renaming the Universal Credit Contingency Fund as per the requests. I know that we talked about this with the Cliff Edge Coalition, and it was also in the independent review of welfare mitigations.
What consideration the department are given to that?
Yeah, they had, the Minister had indicated to me in a question that he was minded to change it, and it was in the process of being changed. It's just really to get a bit of a timeline and an update on that.
Yep, and we are having a session on the on universal credit as well, so there'll be opportunities there to follow up on that. Yeah.
Chair, just, sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Kelly. I think you were just in front.
Right, 421, can I just go back to, could we get a breakdown of the Department for Communities Fresh Start work programme, just what it has been spent on, and for instance how much is being spent in different areas? I'd be quite keen to look at that because it does address some of the issues that comes in front of us with the paramilitarism and organised crime, and that's the Fresh Start in the community piece. So if we could find out how much is cross-community, how much is single identity, you know, what sort of programmes are being delivered by that money?
Yep.
Split out across cross-community, single identity. Is there anything? Is that
To be
suffice?
honest,
Yeah.
it's a breakdown really
Breakdown.
of that. It's just to see how that Fresh Start is dealing with that peace building.
Members content? Thank you. Ciara?
Just one other one in relation to 4.18, and it was part 7 of the response in relation to retrofitting. It's just, obviously we're well aware of the European Regional Development Fund and the amazing work and the investment that the Housing Executive was able to invest in thousands of properties regarding retrofitting. Obviously with the loss of Brexit, has the department engaged with the British government in relation to any replacement funding for retrofitting? It would be useful just to get an update on that as well.
Members agreed? Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, Melissa? No. Okay. So thank you for that, member. So anything else within 4.17 to 4.21, are members content? Yeah. Moving on to items 4.22 to 4.26. Any items within that block, members? Melissa?
Just in 4.22, in relation to the rate support grant, and coming from a council area that benefit from it in the past, and the very fact that it's been greatly reduced from what it had been previously, I would like it noted just that we would like to raise it again just as an issue, and that would encourage the Minister and that to consider in any way at all to be as supportive as they can be to those councils that desperately need the actual rate support grant, because of the very fact that within their council areas, we'll say unlike Belfast as an example, they don't have the same strength in terms of raising rates in the very first instance, you know, so it should be noted, and that would like that sort of to be considered all the time.
Thank you. What do you say? Kelly?
Thank you. 4.22. Can we find out from the department when they talk about the neighbourhood renewal work that's being done? Minister for Agriculture, is coming forward with legislation about dilapidation, which obviously will have an impact on neighbourhood renewal. It's just to find out what the department is planning to do after that legislation is introduced, because I imagine that this will have an impact on neighbourhood renewal, because if dilapidation is going to encourage landlords or owners of buildings that are sitting empty to fix them up, will some of that money enable them to do that? And then 423, it talks about a review of...
Will you go on just to check our members' content? Did we raise that query? Clerk, you
So
can
we're
do?
asking the department what they're planning to do with the forthcoming dilapidation bill via the Minister of Agriculture.
If the
Is that
neighbourhood
it?
renewal piece is going to feed into that,
If
the
neighbourhood
powers that are
renewal.
given.
The,
Then
yeah.
423, it talks about the review of shelter through Gable and Radius. It says all applicants are notified of the support available from the home improvement agencies at application stage. Can we get a copy of that, please? Because I've never seen it, the work. Also, the Housing Executive's response regarding the Trusted Trader scheme, to be honest, is poor. This is where families who are applying for support to transform their home to make it livable for somebody with a disability is, to be honest, in the paperwork that I have seen so far, they're encouraged to go to the Federation of Master Builders and so on, which basically is a Trusted Trader scheme. And there's no plans to review that. I have to say some of the people who are listed are no longer members of that scheme and have absolutely no experience of dealing with disabled adaptations. Can we perhaps ask the department if they are content with what the Housing Executive have said about not reviewing a scheme, given the fact that the process provides or encourages people to go from different lists? And finally, that we have 2.4 under this one.
4.24, yeah.
That Minister Norris, oh my goodness, time's running out in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. When is this going to happen? Can we get clarification either by writing to Minister Norris, or actually both write to Minister Norris and to the department to find out when this is coming forward, because this is January and the funding ends very shortly.
Yep. Members content with that?
Writing again, yeah. Time running out.
Yeah.
Deputy Chair.
And just in relation to 4.22 and neighbourhood renewal as well, and I welcome, obviously, the department has put on a request for the £2 million for medium, large capital projects and small capital projects. I wonder, would it be possible to get a written update in relation to what capital projects are under consideration to be moving forward under neighbourhood renewal in the next financial year? And just in relation to neighbourhood renewal, I have been out with groups recently, and I welcome, obviously, in relation to revenue funded projects, applications will be done online, hopefully. Generally, usually it's pre-Christmas when applications are submitted. However, there is somewhat of a delay in relation to, I think it's the IT system itself. So it would be useful to see if we could get an update as to where that's at. And when applications will be due out for applicants.
Yeah, and just to clarify, it's financial year 25-26,
Yeah.
major capital. Yeah.
And when applications will open.
Revenue applications, yeah.
Members content with that request? Yeah.
Are we asking for that on the 30th, or this in writing back to the committee for discussion when people come in on the 30th, or are we asking for a written?
Probably written, because it could be imminent.
Okay.
It's just, I was out with groups yesterday and they just mentioned that there is a delay due to the IT system.
Okay.
And they weren't aware as to the final date of when the applications will be sent out, and then obviously the deadline to turn the applications around. So if the rewritten update would be good.
Thank you. So members otherwise content with Articles 4.22 to 4.26 in matters arising? Yeah. And then finally in matters arising from 4.27 to 4.30, are there any items within that block that members wish to comment upon? Kelly?
Apologies, Chair. I thought we were stopping that last block at 4.24. Can I just ask the Housing Executive 4.26 just before we move on? Mm-hmm. I'm quite confused by this. If the Housing Executive isn't going to get the receipts back for the sale of houses, that the investment would come from the landlord reserve. I thought that was in two separate sections of the Housing Executive, and they're always very keen to say there is an absolute wall between the two. So I'm not fully aware. I thought that the landlord, when the sale of the houses happened, it went into things like the disabled facilities grant and so on. That's not provided by the landlord section, that's provided by the other part. So can we just see how the landlord reserve then can be used for disabled facilities grant if it's in two different parts of the Housing Executive? That's part
how that transfer operates.
Because if we are looking at the Housing Executive building again and that landlord function coming forward, and being improved, then we can't have this movement between parts of the company. So it's just to get clarification from the Housing Executive how the landlord reserve can pay for a programme that's within the authority side of the organisation.
Are you
Sorry.
content with the...
Yeah, how the landlord reserve can pay for a programme of work on the authority side of the organisation. Yeah.
Members content? Yep. Thank you. So items then 4.27 to 4.30, members. Any items within that members wish to flag up anything? No, members content. Okay. So thank you, members. And moving on then to correspondence. Again, quite a amount of detail within correspondence. The memo for correspondence, members, is at page 200, and there's a tabled correspondence memo in page 3 of your tabled pack. As per the approach we've just taken to matters arising, again I intend to go through these items by number and grouped and ask if you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. I do think there are a number of items which will require more time to review and discuss, but we'll come to those in their block. Are there any items from 5.2 then, members, to 5.6 that you wish to discuss? From 5.2 to 5.6. Yeah,
Just to agree that I think we should get the briefings from both. That's 5.4 and
Yeah.
5.6.
4 and 5.6, yes.
Yeah.
members content with that? Yeah.
Agreed, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, members, 5.2 there is a whole report about the protocol for care for government historic estate. It refers to a framework for managing heritage assets and protocol principles. I am conscious the committee has sought updates on heritage projects on a number of occasions, and we are scheduled to have a briefing in relation to the emerging heritage, culture and creativity policies, and that briefing scheduled for the 6th of March. And there has been even recent media reports around heritage issues. Are members content that for now we note this and bring it back for more fulsome discussion at that March meeting?
Yes,
Agreed.
Thanks, members. 5.4 and 5.6 then, members, are requests to present by co-ownership and women's policy. Those are the two that we've already agreed. We'll take both those. Okay, so members otherwise content with the items within that block. So moving on then to the block from 5.7 to 5.11. And there are a number of important items in this bundle, members. I'll come back to you on other issues, but there are a couple of important items in this bundle, including the annual report and accounts of Arts Council, and information from the Finance Committee, re-spring supplementary estimates and January monitoring. So I appreciate that members do need to have the information contained in the correspondence now, but as a committee, it may be an idea to bring these back in future weeks to align with the briefings that are scheduled on those items, and in relation to the work planned in February on the arts that we're doing on the arts. So are members content that we feed those back in at those times? You have the information now, but we will bring them back for convenience.
Could I just double check then, say for 5.10, the spring supplementary estimates and January monitoring, would that be for a separate presentation by the departmental officials, their finance department, rather than including it in the 30th of January?
In February.
Excellent.
They've said they won't be ready before the date that we've put it in February.
But it's specific to that.
Yeah.
So we'll retable it at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just about 5.9 and Prony. It had been mentioned at the start when we had first restored the assembly that it might be appropriate for the committee to have a visit to Prony. I am just wondering, and I know that potentially if this is not for the committee, I'm more than happy to organise that myself, but I think it could be really useful as a committee to actually have that visit to Prony and to actually see I suppose the work that they're doing in terms of that really important archiving and the holding of records. I'm just wondering if that would be appropriate, Chair, to try and organise maybe a...
Well, I definitely think so. If members are agreed, I think it is an important issue. It's also one, I think, and I am in agenda item 6 going to come back to this issue. We are going to be receiving more of these requests in an agenda format, and I think it will be useful to hear from Prony at the process they go through, sort of to reassure ourselves around the rigour of and what's involved in their process. So when items come to us, we have a clearer understanding. So maybe there's a way to...
Possible, maybe, because I know that we've done kind of the meetings elsewhere. Maybe it would be possible to hold one of our meetings in in proning. Whether that would then
Do that.
We could
For that
combine the
briefing
two, yeah.
session.
We
combine,
could try to combine those two. It may mean shuffling things around a little, but it's important. I agree. I think, along with everything else that's so important within the department, this is a really important issue as well. So it's something that does require a bit of attention. So within 5.7 to 5.11, is there anything else that members want to flag up? Or members otherwise content? Yeah, thank you. Items 5.12 to 5.16, members then, anything within that? If I could just flag that 5.16 is the report on discretionary support, a line of which stood out, and I think it would be useful for the committee to seek clarification on. So the line that stood out was, many of the changes require amendment to the discretionary support regulations, which in any event are due for an overhaul, as we now have several years experience of the practicalities of the scheme and where anomalies lie. While some of the independent review's recommendations will improve the scheme without expenditure repercussions, and it goes on then, but would members be content we ask the department to confirm whether there is any regulatory reform work being undertaken for discretionary support?
Yeah,
If members
absolutely.
are content. So that's on 5.16, and then members come back to yourselves for 5.12 to 5.16. Any other items? Okay, members content, thank you. Items 5.17 to 5.21 then. Are there any within that? And again, I'll flag one in this before I go back to you, members. So 5.19 is about the move to universal credit, and we are getting that briefing coming up dedicated to that. So I just want members to flag that to members that is a dedicated briefing. But otherwise, or including any other queries within 5.17 to 5.21. Have members anything they wish to raise? No, thank you. Go ahead,
Just one comment in relation to 5.20, the Youth Assembly update. Obviously, from the review of the detailed information they have provided, you can see the wealth of work, ongoing work that they are involved in, whether it's mental health, young women's rights, educational issues, etc. So just to congratulate them on the busy year that they had, and just to wish them the very best now moving forward in 2025.
Like a letter from the committee to the
Yes,
youth? Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Yep. So otherwise, then members content with items within 5.17 to 5.21. Yeah. Moving on then to item 5.22 to 5.26. Are there any items within that members wish to discuss further? And just to clarify, members, item 5.24 and 5.32 are the same report, but it was received via two different routes. So it came from the Business Office and also came from the DALO. These are the report and the statutory review of the operation of the existing welfare supplementary payment schemes, which we were awaiting and which had to be prepared by 31st of March 2025. The correspondence includes an offer from officials to brief. So can I seek members' agreement that we accept the offer of that briefing and ask that it take place before committee receive the new proposal for regulation?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So any other items within 5.22 to 5.26 members want to flag or comment on? No, members content with those, thank you. And then in terms of correspondence then, are there any items from 5.27 to 5.32 that any members wishes to discuss further or flag any issues with? No, members are content with the memo as provided. Okay, so members are content with the correspondence memos then after that discussion, and on the further queries that have arose, members are otherwise content with the correspondence memo. And the correspondence memo in the table pack as well. Yep. Thank you, members. So, members, then, agenda item 6 is retention and disposal schedule for the Armagh Observatory and Planetarium. In line with the principle that Assembly committees have a role in scrutinising the actions of their respective departments, the retention and disposal schedules that are sent to the committee will now need to be considered as a separate agenda item going forward, treated in much the same way as we would treat SRs. So this is the retention and disposal of records. So the schedules are subject to negative resolution procedure, and any member or committee may seek a resolution to pray for the preservation of specified records in a retention and disposal schedule. So in relation to this retention and disposal schedule, are members content with the schedule?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. And members, as I have suggested there, and we have already agreed, we'll seek to organise that briefing with Prony just to clarify how that process works. So timeframes are just let me. Yeah, we're going to be very mindful of the normal deadlines and timeframes set out for SRs being considered by committee and planner, and that, so it's a bit more formal in terms of how that's going to be managed going forward. So we'll have to include that in our forward work programme.
Yes, previously they would have been noted in correspondence,
Yeah.
but now they need their individual agenda item and agreement.
Okay, so members are agreed with that, and members, I also propose that we seek a briefing paper from RAISE setting out how retention and disposal schedules are handled in other jurisdictions, just to get a sense of, because I'm especially conscious of when it comes to disposal of records, it's a kind of quite a major decision, or maybe a major decision to certain sections or certain individuals who may, so I think it's something that we need to be quite well cited on. So a RAISE document would be benefit if members are agreed. Yeah.
Agreed, and maybe in relation to RAISE, be interesting, is there any variance elsewhere? Not only locally here, across the island, across GB, but in other countries as well. Is there any variances?
International examples
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well. Okay.
Well, anything that's European funded is 13 years. So, that would be a difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Include that in the request. Comparison. Okay.
And just before we fully move off, I should say I've been to the planetarium a few times. It's actually brilliant resource. It's really interesting. Interesting facility. It's quite unique. Okay, members, moving on then to our agenda item 7, and I just want to check with the clerk. And
He's not available just
Okay.
yet. We're slightly ahead of time.
okay, so maybe move on to. Are we in a position to move on to agenda item 8?
ASRs, yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
So
And the SL1.
if members are content, maybe we'll move on to some of these SRs and bring back Jerry once he arrives there. So I'll go on then to agenda item 8, which is SR 2025/2, the gaming variation of monetary limits order NI 2025. A copy of the rule is in your table papers at page 26, and the cover memo is at page 15. In November, committee agreed at SL1 stage that we were content for the department to make the rule. We do have officials today should members have any queries on the rule, and we can call them forward if needed. I will therefore ask members, are there any queries on the rule that you would like officials to address? No, thank you. So members, then, have members any objection to the rule? No. So therefore, can I ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/2, the gaming variation of money limits, order NI 2025, and recommends that it is affirmed by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 9, SR 2025/1, the housing benefit and universal credit housing costs, in brackets executive determinations, in brackets modification, regulations NI 2025, and these are contained at page 1451. So we considered the SL1 for this rule at our meeting on the 12th of December, and we were content for the department to proceed with making the rule. Have members any objection to the rule? No? Thank you. Therefore, do members, can I ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/1, the housing benefit and universal credit housing costs, executive determinations, modification, regulations 2025, and has no objection to the rule. Are members agreed? Thank you, members. Agenda item 10. It's an SL1, members. So this is the Social Security Income and Capital Disregards Amendment Regulations NI 2025 at page 1461. The purpose of the proposed rule is to ensure payments made by the Ministry of Defence LGBT Financial Recognition Scheme to those personnel affected by the ban on LGBT personnel serving from 1967 to 2000 are disregarded indefinitely for the purposes of calculating entitlement to means-tested benefits. Do members have any comments, or are they content for the department to make and proceed and make their own?
Intent.
Yeah. 10 members, thank you. So,
I would propose we take a short break and I'll check on the availability of the next people, if that's okay.
yeah, that's okay. So members, we'll take a short break here and we'll just get the table reset and check availability, but we'll take a break there to say 10:45 and we'll come back again then.
Okay.
Thank you, members.
Not used to driving again. Yeah.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Morning.
Are we back broadcasting? Do we know?
Haven't had a response yet.
Just waiting on clarification from broadcasting.
That's us live. Thank you.
So members, we are live and we're resuming then at agenda item 7, and this is the People's Housing Bill and briefing by Jerry Carroll, MLA. So Jerry, Tafalcha Road, you're very welcome, both of you very welcome to this morning's meeting. So we have Jerry with us and also Rebecca Corbett, who's Policy and Communications Officer. Jerry, I invite you to make an opening statement before we move to questions from members, and we may not be under as much pressure of time as we thought we had, so we should have a decent amount of time, Jerry, so if you want to go ahead.
Colin agus Gormagovas and Curry, thanks for the invitation, members, and happy to present the key proposals and aims that we're discussing and consulting on with the People's Housing Bill. So obviously, as people will know, the committee will know, people are paying on average £1,027 a month in rent. In Belfast, it's around close to £900 a month across the north, which is completely unfair and unsustainable. There's a complete power imbalance, and I would say the law favours landlords and allows them to increase their rent without any consequence whatsoever. And because of the scale of the housing crisis and government inaction, people are essentially forced to pay this. People are being evicted for no reason or protection, and I'm sure you all have horror stories in your own constituents. A constituent of mine was evicted 2 days before Christmas, and that was legal, that was allowed, but completely cruel and heartless, and there's countless stories across my and other people's constituency like that. And evictions obviously don't only happen, as you know, in the private sector, but in the social housing sector, we have a rise in people housing executive tenants. I raised this in member statements on Tuesday, who are NIHE tenants, and they are not granted a succession tenancy because of the changes made in 2022 and other issues as well. So I think we need strong legislation to tackle some of the worst effects of the housing crisis, including cracking down on private landlords who are profiteering and make better use of the housing stock that we have by turning empty houses into homes, and that's what we're seeking to hear people's view on with this consultation. So I think rent reduction, no fault eviction, bans and longer duration of tenancies can help with some of this. And people will know in the past year in the north the rents increased by 10%, which is higher than any other UK region. And the same period, average wages here increased by just 1.2% after inflation. So the price of housing is obviously increasing much faster than people's wages, and public sector workers in that time period saw their pay decrease when inflation was obviously taken into account by 2.8%. So many people can't afford to keep a roof over their head, and they're obviously presenting to the housing executive as being homeless and needing support as is their right. And in our view, a straightforward way to prevent homelessness is to make sure people can sustain their tenancies in their private rented sector. One way to introduce the tackle this is by introducing a no-fault eviction ban, which is in the consultation, and we're keen to hear people's views on that. There's one obviously in Scotland with I think quite a few exemptions, but still there's one in place, and I think really that coupled with longer default tenancy lengths could help protect people who are in the private rented sector. And Scotland also has open-ended tenancies, which means a tenant can essentially stay there in the property until they wish to leave, or until the landlord can use one of those, I think it's 18 reasons to evict them. And I think really a no-fault eviction ban is something that our party supports. I know other MLAs do support, but by itself it don't work without some form of rent control, which is what we're obviously seeking to hear the committee's view, but also the public's view on as well. We obviously, if we make it tougher for a landlord to evict a tenant and do nothing else, a landlord will simply increase their rent to an unaffordable level, which effectively will mean the tenant can't pay, and different description, but be effectively evicted from the property because they can't afford to pay the increased amount of rent. And it would be a quick way and an easy way for a landlord to get around a no-fault eviction ban, so we don't obviously want that. So stronger legislation and security of tenure and rent regulation are part and parcel of the same similar issue. So we're consulting on people's views, but we're looking at the idea of proposing to reduce rents to 20% of average income in an area, making it easier for tenants to stay in their homes, to afford their rents, to not be evicted, and to avoid homelessness, and obviously have some more money in the pockets of renters. Another aspect, Chair, that we're looking at through the consultation is vacant homes. I think the committee might have been looking at this before, and there's at least 22,500 empty homes, empty properties across the north. And in my view, in our party's view, nobody should be able to sit on an empty property while so many people, almost 90,000 people, are in housing stress or homeless. It's completely it's quite disgusting, to be frank. The bill is proposing to introduce a use it or lose it system, where owners are given a set period of time. We're considering 6 months. If a property is empty for more than 6 months, then a fining system comes in place, forcing the landlord to use that property. Some people may balk at that, but I think it's a very moderate and fair proposal. And this could possibly even be administered through the rate system. We're obviously exploring that through the consultation, but that's one of the proposals in the early stages of the bill, which obviously isn't drafted, as people will know, but there's a proposal for it. And under the 1981 housing order, the housing executive also has the power to acquire land on behalf of housing associations for the development of social housing, and this could be a way to add to the stock of social housing. But obviously we're keen to explore that through the consultation further. And just to wrap up on the consultation process, so it's due to close on the Assembly website the end of January. We'll probably extend that for another 10 days or so, just because there's a few organisations who are feeding back, but because of Christmas and work pressures, they need a bit more time. So we're finalising that date, Chair, so that'll probably be around the 5th or 7th of February, and we'll communicate that to the committee and the public in the coming days. We've received at least 200 individual responses so far. That might have went up since the last time I checked, and responses have been pretty different ranges of people. Private tenants about 34%, social tenants 17%, owner occupiers 40% responded to the survey, and about 7% of people who are homeless and 5% people who are landlords have responded. And obviously we haven't analysed every single aspect of the response, but there seems to be some support for tackling increased rents. Some 90% say private rent is unaffordable, which is what I'm picking up every single day of the week in my constituency office, on the streets, in the community, and people are probably the same. And around 80% agree or strongly agree that rent controls should be implemented in some shape or form, and 35% said rent control would have a significant or some negative impact on landlords. 85% agree that vacant properties should be used to help tackle the housing waiting lists. 83% said that the housing executive should be encouraged to bring these properties into use as social homes. Some 81% agreed or strongly agreed that landlords have too much power to evict tenants. 71% said they or someone they know have faced a no-fault eviction. 80% disagreed or strongly disagreed that there is enough regulation of the private rented sector. And we've held a series of public consultation meetings, Chair. Quite a few in Belfast, in Lurgan, several online, a few more coming up in Belfast, Coleraine, Newry, probably somewhere else I missed. Apologies to those who are in the areas. And we've had a range of meetings. I think it's around maybe 40 or so organisations we've met. Not to name them all, but like the Housing Rights, Charter Institute of Housing, CAT2, same community, and there's a longer list. And if anybody has any suggestions about who we should engage with in that process, we're all here. So thanks for the time, Chair. Happy to answer whatever questions I can.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. And I suppose in relation to the vacant homes ones, I thought it was an interesting one. And in terms of, so how would those be identified at a 6-month period as being vacant, and then who would be responsible for the kind of the implementation and enforcement of the proposed measures? How do you envisage that?
Well, there's, as far as I understand, they already exist. The homes are known, as far as I'm aware. That 22,500 figure, we got that from the Department of Finance, I think, wasn't
LPS,
it? LPS. So presumably there's a database with the AOF where those properties are identifiable, and obviously that would be pretty easy to manage. And your second question about who would administer the kind of the fining system in place, I mean probably through the LPS and Department of Finance as well, because obviously through the rate system. So I think that would probably be the easiest way for that to be administered. I mean obviously part of it is us seeing what works best, hearing other people's ideas, but I think that seems to be the most straightforward and simple way to administer it, rather than overcomplicate it or creating a new organisation, which we are looking at through the consultation in terms of a rental board, but in terms of administering something that in terms of empty properties, I think that's probably the most straightforward and simplest way to do.
Sure, can I just come in on that point very quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
I actually recently tabled a question on this, Jerry, and DFC came back to me and they advised, since the change to the rating system in 2011 around empty homes, that there's no financial advantage or incentive for individuals to report that. So there would need to be a change to actually collate that data.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the wider point would stand about, I think the focus shouldn't be on financial incentives to the people who have the properties. It should be on the, almost 90,000 people, as who are in need of a home in terms of homeless or housing stress. So I think there's a body of work to be done, but obviously the executive has said that housing, I think, is one of their priorities as well. Identifying and using the large amount of empty properties should be a fundamental part. I think the executive, frankly, should be doing it already, and the minister, I think, has said somewhat he's broadly supportive of some measures around that, around vacant properties, but he hasn't obviously detailed what he's going to do. So
yeah, no, I suppose the only reason to make the point is obviously you're bringing forward the proposal, Jerry, and obviously you'll need to go into that data and into that to interrogate as to what you're going to bring forward. And obviously currently the rating system doesn't identify that, and obviously the department does set out their viewpoint as to why it would not be reported by individuals or homeowners. But currently there isn't a process to do that, and certainly they went on to say that and caveat that the data, they would caution the data may not be wholly accurate, so there would need to be a fundamental review in that instance, and I think that needs to be considered as part of your process.
yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, it may be the case that it's probably a higher figure. You know, there probably is more homes that aren't identified, but you know, we all know in our streets, in our towns, our communities where there's empty homes. So yeah, it's a fair point, and it's something that obviously I'm on the finance committee, as people know, but I think there needs to be maybe a refreshed approach about gathering that data. Part of the process of the bill, you know, we could, the finance department should probably make a call out to say to people, if you've got an empty home in your area, let us know. But the point you're making is obviously the limited resources.
There needs to be a requirement though, because people won't report it if there isn't a requirement, and currently what the department's saying under that change in 2011, there is no requirement or incentive to report it. Whether incentive should be the way that it should be put forward, that's open to debate, but there currently is no requirement.
Yeah. It should be, yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Okay. So just to clear on this point, and then I'm going to go to Kelly, Morris and Militia in that order.
No, it's just on this point, and I would agree with you. If we have empty homes lying here and we have a huge housing crisis with so many vulnerable people currently in housing stress, is there any available data? It's probably more nosiness in unpacking why the homes are empty. Is there a percentage in relation to because it's dereliction, cost, their second, third homes? Is there any understanding, or is there any available research already done on that issue?
Good question. We don't have that data. I don't know if it exists, to be perfectly honest, but it'd be something we'd be keen to find out.
Right.
So
I don't think it exists at the minute. It's just the register on LPS is just vacant domestic properties. There's no, I mean, it's broken down by council area. There's no listed reason for it, or whether it's second or third homes or anything. I think, as far as I understand, that doesn't include like second or third homes, maybe, unless they're officially registered as vacant or derelict, I guess. Yeah.
Just on that, in relation to council areas, he says it's broken down by council areas. Is there any, I'm assuming, but I'm only assuming, and obviously you have done the work on this, just what kind of council areas is really, really clear that there is a huge issue regarding empty homes? Is there specific council areas that need to be targeted?
yeah, we've got some of the figures through from the department, and I know the Belfast area, it's just over 3,000, it's 3,286 I think, but just over 3,000 empty homes, and we've got sort of some of that broken down by Belfast constituency, so if people are looking at that, we can provide that quite readily. I think we're waiting back on answers from other areas, so we've asked, I think, for every constituency across the north to see what that breakdown is. I would imagine it's places like West Belfast, North Belfast and Derry, but I don't have that confirmed, so we can certainly provide those answers to the committee, or they'll be available on the Assembly website through questions if members want to check that out.
Just to add, we do have a breakdown for Derry and Strabane by common landlord area. We can send that through.
Well, that'd be useful, thank you.
Thank you. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Chair. Guys, congratulations, having been through this process. I feel your pain. Good luck with it. Rebecca, my prayers are with you. Just my own officer that worked with me on it, who was fantastic. We both have grey hair now. But no, thank you very much for bringing this forward. I do share your concerns about sustainable tenancies and the no-fault eviction. So the first one I want to ask you about is the no-fault eviction ban. You've mentioned Scotland a couple of times. I'm concerned about the Scotland one because I think it's 18 reasons that they provide for landlords are very wide. For instance, if you were to say that the no-fault eviction ban was to include the landlord's ability to sell their home, do they? You know, that's not really followed up in the Scottish legislation. Would you be planning to improve on that, say, if you did include that in it, to require proof of sale? You know, is there something there that we can improve on that we've learned from others?
Yeah, well, very good question. I mean, obviously, as you know, obviously the PMB process is quite limited. You can only include so much as you know, and I've had a few grey hairs as well, and so much PMB into, so much just general. But so obviously if we're going to go down the line of including no fault eviction in the PMB, I think we'd like it to be a bit more robust, because we heard from yourself, Kelly, and other people that the Scottish model, whilst it's evidence that you can do this in legislation, it's too wide, it's too wholly, and there's room for, I think, taking advantage of people. So I think if we're going to go down that route in terms of including that in the legislation, which we would like to, or if the minister goes back and introduces or looks at introducing stuff around the fault eviction, I think it needs to be a bit more robust than the Scottish model. Would be our general view, I think, Rebecca.
Yeah, definitely, and also some sort of mechanism to monitor what happens to property after a landlord's like saying that they're going to sell it, or that a friend or family member has moved in. In the draft proposals we do, as Jerry talked about, we have an idea for a rental board to monitor those sorts of things. Obviously that's all dependent on resource, but that's a worthwhile body to have to monitor and enforce no fault eviction bans, also rent controls if they come in, I think, and also collect and analyse data as well that's so desperately needed, not only in the vacant properties too, but data about landlords, where their properties are, how much they're charging, who their tenants are. I think a rental board is desperately needed.
To be honest, I agree with you. Private rents are unaffordable. I know you've mentioned there about that 20% income, average income level. I have areas in my constituency that are extraordinarily wealthy. A lot of farming community, but there are pockets of deprivation there that are in like the top 10%. If you take an average income, then we're in trouble, because the average income in a wealthy area will be quite high compared to the pockets of deprivation where the majority of people are living on benefits and struggling with that. I'm just wondering, are you taking anything into consideration about that level? So rural farming communities, their income might be, their profits might not, but it's just balancing what will be the income.
It's a fair question. I mean, in our initial proposal, we had, I think, 20% of income. Rent could be 20% of income, and then it was raised with us that there could be an issue for, say, in urban areas where landlords just take the higher earners and obviously have a higher rent, are legally allowed to have a higher rent. So that's obviously where the area income is kind of, we're exploring. I mean, it's a fair point. How that is detailed in legislation to avoid the problem that there is a fair question. I think it's something we need to look at and explore, because obviously we wouldn't want to inadvertently ensure that people in Strangford, isn't it, and elsewhere are charged more. We're trying to bring rents down. So, I mean, it's something we need to consider, and we're happy to work with you, yourself or anybody in that regard to ensure that that's not the case. So maybe there's some clauses we can introduce or look at. I just don't have the.
As well on that, at the minute we have a market situation where demand outstrips the supply, and that's why we're seeing the costs going through the roof. If the Minister's plans through the housing supply strategy happen and we have 100,000 extra homes in Northern Ireland over the next 15 years, that demand hopefully will be met. So we would see more competition and potentially then prices fix or reduce even, because there'll be competition in the market. Will your considerations allow for landlords to be more competitive? It will not, the rent controls, for instance, will allow that to happen.
I think the problem that we're getting at is that leaving it to the market has caused this, problem. Now we're not, we're making specific proposals, and I think the problem has been there's been a bit of a hands-off approach, Kelly, with landlords. I mean, obviously we want 100,000 homes to be built. I mean, it's a lot of that housing supply strategy sounds positive, but the detail is, I think only a third of it is social homes, which is a massive problem. A lot of the homes, I'm guessing, are likely to be maybe geared towards not solely or exclusively or mainly geared towards dealing with the waiting lists. So I think there still will be a need for some of the proposals that we talk about. If the Minister implements all that he's saying, that would be positive in terms of more homes being built. But there's, I think there's gaps in that housing supply strategy to be made about it. And I think part of that is no funding allocated to it, and the fact that there's such a small portion of those homes are social housing. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Rebecca, in terms of
No, that's it. Just it's about the breakdown of the affordability of the homes that will be provided. I think if you leave it entirely up to the market, you'll just get an influx of unaffordable homes. The sort of simple supply and demand economics sort of doesn't really apply to things like homes. These aren't like traditional commodities. So yeah, I think a real focus on social and affordable homes, and rent control is one easy way to make homes more affordable for people quite quickly.
Just finally, we're aware that Lisburn and Castlereagh Council have been earmarked by the department to bring forward how a landlord registry would improve and work across the councils, and they're coordinate that for the council. In fact, we have a presentation coming up from them soon. I would just suggest have a chat with them, because it may well be that some of what they're doing you could actually use for the monitoring and so on. So although theirs is a private landlord register, it's not all landlords. But also the housing supply strategy talks about a housing ombudsman. Again, that seems to fit quite well with what you're talking about with the housing board. No, but to be honest, guys, good luck. 6 years of my life went into the last PMB that I did, and I wish you well with it. You're very ambitious with your approach, and I look forward to seeing it coming forward. Yeah, thank you.
Much, Kelly, and you said good luck, but this is the very early stages. But I appreciate the kind words, and we'll take on board your suggestion. It's a good one. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going now on Zoom to Morris. Go ahead, Morris, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Jerry and Rebecca for the presentations. Having not had sight of the bill and just listening to the presentation this morning, I think it has the potential to address several issues in Northern Ireland's housing crisis, particularly around affordability and security of tenure. However, one question I would like to ask Jerry, have you considered the financial viability and the legal complexities and the implementation logistics needed to bring this bill to fruition?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is we're obviously presuming you're talking about sort of right to private property and that being embedded in legislation, which it is, but also the right to housing is UN Convention as well. And I think not just myself and our party, but I think most people think the right to housing should supersede the right to private property. So I'm presuming that's your question or your angle. And obviously some other aspects of it could be complex in terms of drafting the legislation. But for your benefit, Morris, there's a lot of rent controls, rent regulations and rent reductions in many countries. I can go through them all if you want, but like Denmark, Malta, Sweden, Spain, Germany, they're not all exactly what we're proposing, but there's elements of rent regulation and rent reduction, and we met with the Human Rights Consortium and we can share information that they sent about legal briefings in general, not about our bill, but in general about rent regulation. And there's quite a consensus, I don't want to misquote them, but there's a consensus amongst many human rights organisations and individuals that it's up to member states and governments to decide housing policy. So I would maybe say that in terms of your question.
And it might be, Morris, just before we come back, there might be an idea for the committee to get that UN special report. Yeah, we can seek that.
I think that from memory that was just general briefing on housing, but certainly I can share that with the committee, no problem.
Yeah, and
He was waiting on the UN special rapporteur to come back with a report after it met, so we can follow that up.
We had facilitated a meeting with, so we are engaged in that work as well. Morris, back to yourself.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Jerry. There's a lot of complexities in balancing the needs of the tenant and the landlord, and the types of vacant property. My constituency covers a lot of seaside, coastal areas, and the vacant properties there are mainly second homes. So there's a different way of looking at things, and that would need to be taken into consideration as well. Plus, a lot of the vacant property in my area would be taken up by Airbnb. So I wish you well with the bill. I'm looking forward to the contents of it, and I do think it has got great potential, so I wish you well.
Thanks very much, Morris. And obviously, I mean, Airbnbs has been raised with us in a number of our consultation events, and mostly rural MLAs, but also increasingly urban areas. It's an issue. It's not specifically in the bill, Morris, but it's something that obviously I would encourage people to feed back, because if there's a growing concern, which there is, about Airbnbs and for regulation, because there's limited, if any at all, then I think there's a case to be made to the Minister. If it's not in the bill, the Minister should look at that. So keen to hear your and other people's views on that. And second homes won't be affected, obviously, because we're talking about homes that have been empty for 6 months, so presumably second homes will be used, in and out of that period. But it's a fair point to make. I know obviously in rural areas, people are making the point that whilst people can't get a social house, there's people with multiple homes, and it's a fair criticism, I think.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Morris. Yeah. I'm going now to Melissa. Is that all right?
Okay, Patrick Rove and Shaw, Jerry, and Rebecca. You're both very welcome here today, and I was very interested just in the comments that you were making there, Jerry. Going back to sort of 2 points, and I know that they have already been raised, but could you just expand on, we'll say, the no-fault eviction ban and its relationship to rent control?
Yeah, so basically what we're saying, Melissa, is we want a no-fault eviction ban. It's our party policy, and as I said to Kelly, a stronger model than Scotland. But if we have just that and no rent controls, then effectively a landlord could put up increase the cost of rent again. They could breach. There's obviously no limit on increasing rent. I know the Minister is proposing to tackle that somewhat, but you could have a very strong, on paper, no fault eviction policy, which is ideally better than Scotland. But then the landlord could bump up the rent again by £100–200 a year, and effectively people are evicted because they can't afford to pay the rent. So it's kind of an eviction through the, I don't want to say back door, because it's but it's a form. What's right? By proxy, thank you. Yeah, by proxy. So that's the kind of point I was making. So you need obviously no fault eviction legislation, but also rent reduction and controls as well.
In terms of the rent reduction, you talk about 20%, we'll say, of the average wage within a particular area. Is that going to lend itself to sort of a very sort of a piecemeal type structure, say, throughout the whole of the country in that?
In terms of, what do you mean, sorry?
You know, that if you're looking, we'll say, 20% of the average wage in an area, right? What's an area here? Are you chatting about the whole of the north of Ireland? Or are you chatting about specific locations and so on? Because if you're chatting about the whole of the north of Ireland, that's one thing. But that, and even with that, that will create its own anomalies as well too. But that if it's not the whole of the north of Ireland, if it's to be, we'll say, within particular areas, identifying boundaries, and to what extent it lends itself to sort of a real piecemeal type structure.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, I think what we're exploring is sort of council areas at the minute as a way to identify that, and it might address some of the points that Kelly made and some of the points that you're making, because I'd imagine if it's Northern Way, it would probably not bring rents down enough, I would imagine, but we need to check that. So what we're currently exploring is look at council areas, so areas of deprivation, and those issues can be taken into account, and it's at 20% is obviously reflective of the average income in the area. I mean, there's some maybe issues that need to be ironed out in terms of areas where you have pockets of poverty in wealthier areas, so that's a fair point and something we would want to address. But I think look at council areas, council wards is probably the best way to identify a workable policy that's ultimately going to reduce rent. So I mean that's what we're looking at. Do you have a specific concern, or just kind of you're just looking to detail?
Looking at the detail in that, I'm just getting my head around it as well too, in a sense, but that in a way too, that again too is like rent control effectively. And will that apply to all residents and all properties, such as housing executive tenants and those with private landlords?
We're just proposing at the minute the private rent sector, but obviously we're keen to hear from people who want that reduction in the housing executive and housing associations as well. But the proposal at the minute is just the private rental sector.
Yeah. And again, too, like our rest of our colleagues, I wish you all the best, and particularly, that whole area of no fault eviction, and I've confronted that issue on a number of different occasions already, and I don't want to be too glad to see something coming to the fore on that. So my shift, good on you.
Okay, so we're going to Brian, then Ciara, then Andy. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Colin, Chair, and thank you, Jerry, Rebecca. And I mean, your paper contains many desirable outcomes, and practical issues which we're all dealing with. So just want to check. First of all, do any private rental controls exist in Northern Ireland currently? I mean, if you're getting housing benefit, there's a limit to how much is paid. That's set from Westminster. But is there any body that people can go to and say this is a ridiculous rent? It's been expected for this property. Is it totally just a free market?
Essentially, yes. There's a limited form of rent controls. I think it's through the 1981 order. So if they, it's basically, I don't have the legislation in front of me, Brian, but it's essentially if the house is effectively falling apart, the tenant can apply to DFC, or the council, I think it's a DFC, for a rent control and a rent reduction. So in theory, there's a legislation for a form of rent reduction and control, but it's obviously very limited. There's small numbers of properties that's applied to. I think we have the assembly question on that we can share with the committee. So in theory, it exists somewhat, but it's a very, very small occasions that's used, and only in a sense when properties are in a very, very bad state of repair. But across the board, it's essentially a free market without any regulation or control.
Okay, thanks for that. In terms of the private rental sector is an important part of the provision of housing for people. So for those that will say the more regulation, the more rent controls, the more that could result in a reduction of supply, driving landlords out of the market or making it not profitable for them. What investigations have you done on that, on the consequences of rent control or other regulation? And that's not to speak against the value of regulation, but it's thinking through the practical consequences.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I mean, there's actually no evidence that landlords flee the market when there's rent controls introduced. It's obviously often used as a criticism of what we're proposing and other people propose, but there's no actually evidence of it happening anywhere. So, and also obviously in terms of landlords generally, I mean the housing executive in a survey of 1,710 landlords said there's just over a third depend on the property, on the rent for covering the cost of mortgages. So 2/3 of landlords don't need, if you will, the rental income to afford whatever. And obviously we make the point that already the sector and private rented accommodation are already in many cases in a bad state of disrepair, to put it mildly. Too many properties covered in mould and damp, and I think obviously leaving up to the market, which essentially is what the situation is currently, has led to a spike in the cost of housing. So yeah, I don't think there's not a scaremongering that usually goes on when we're talking about regulating the sector, but I think it's too important to not regulate, given that every other aspect of life is regulated, is looked at, and people spend obviously so much of their time, their life and their day in their home. This should be the same as well.
Okay. On the derelict properties, and appreciate some other areas, they can be second homes, but by and large, in North Belfast, it's very frustrating when I go around and see properties, particularly attached to other properties, and they're long-term derelict, and I flagged these up to the housing executive. I know they have a very slow process in exceptional circumstances where properties can be vested, but I also know of housing associations who own empty properties, and they say just because of the age of the properties, they're not viable for them, and really should be looking towards a redevelopment, which housing executive is less inclined to do now, major redevelopments. So I would be concerned that the number of derelict properties slowly creeps up. the housing executive tell me they used to have an empty home strategy or a unit dealing with it, but they actually wound it up because they felt it wasn't able to make much progress because of the ownership issues of all these houses. What engagement have you had with the housing executive on this matter currently? And I know you're wanting it to be a focus, and everyone would welcome that.
On the empty homes specifically?
Yes, currently what they're doing.
Not directly. We're due to meet them next week about a range of issues, so we're going to explore that. I mean, my understanding of empty homes in terms of housing associations, we met in NIFA before Christmas, and they said basically a high percentage, over 90% of their homes, of their members' homes are in use, which obviously would still be, I would imagine.
Who said that?
NIFHA.
Right, yeah.
But I would still imagine that's probably somewhat several hundred, possibly several thousand homes are not in use, but we don't have the detail of how long they're out of use. But the majority of those 22,000 empty homes, as I understand it, are private homes. In terms of the empty home strategy, that's disappointing. I mean, I'm not aware of how much in that strategy the housing executive was actually looking at expanding the CPO so that they have the power to compulsory purchase properties. It's been used a small amount of times, I think, hasn't it, Rebecca, over the last number of years. So we would like to see that utilised much more often, especially when you have homes that are lying empty for years, as is the case in North, but West Belfast and across the board. So yeah, we're keen to explore that with the housing executive, and I think really it needs to be utilised much more to help deal with the high waiting lists in North and West Belfast.
One last question, Chair. When you proposed a rental board, one of which would be about the fitness standards of properties. So obviously that's largely done currently through local councils, environmental health. At a more local level, you'd be proposing something possibly which is, I don't know, would you be saying that this potentially a new body would look after that across Northern Ireland? Or what is your concerns about the current arrangements through environmental health?
I mean, we've met environmental health, Belfast City Council, Brian, and they've told us the legislation, which is mostly, I think it's exclusively, if not mostly, the 1981 housing order, which is quite restrictive. So, and obviously councils are under, as you'll know from previous rules, as I do as well, under a lot of pressure, under resourced. So the aim, if implemented, would be to have a body that's working alongside councils, alongside environmental health, but it's really proactive, and environmental health do important work, but I think we need to see a more robust body that's proactive, that has the power to challenge, fine, and drag landlords through court where necessary if housing standards aren't met, if repairs aren't made. So kind of the work in tandem with the environmental health and the councils is what we're suggesting, Brian. But I think for them to do it all themselves, I think it's probably too difficult.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So going then to Ciara.
Well, you obviously, that was kind of one of the key questions around the rental board, but just first and foremost, thanks Jerry and Rebecca for coming along, and it is quite ambitious, but rightly so, given the key areas, and I really like the 4 key areas around affordability, vacant property, security of tenure, housing conditions. And I was going to ask the question just around the rental board, what's kind of your thoughts on what that would look like, and kind of where would the lead come from within, well, a department, housing councils, or as you mentioned, Jerry, it may be a mixture of all. I would kind of, suppose, rightly declare that obviously I myself working on a private members bill as well, particularly in relation to letting fees in the private rented sector. And I'm conscious that one of your key questions that you're asking is around limiting how many months rent up front. So kind of what's the feedback to date on that? What's your thoughts on that? And I would be very keen, obviously, maybe to follow up, obviously, with yourselves, and we can maybe collaborate as well. And I'm hoping to go out for consultation over the next week or 2 as well. So that's just to declare that.
Yeah, sure.
So you don't see in a couple of weeks' time I will out. So I'm very keen to work with you. But just around that affordability issue, the private rented sector and rent up front, what's kind of the feedback to date on that?
Well, thanks, Kieran. I'm keen to work with you on that as much as we can. Do you want to maybe try and answer that question? Is okay?
I can take the bit about rent up front. From memory, I think of all the questions we asked, that was one that evoked like the strongest support. Like, it's very intuitive that people think it's ridiculous that some people are being asked to pay 6 or 12 months rent up front. Most people don't have that kind of cash. Completely unaffordable, blocks access to the private rented sector. And also, you'll know the recent amendment to the Renters Reform Bill in Westminster, that'll aim to crack down on that as well. So it's increasingly unsustainable, I think, for us to not regulate against things like landlords demanding multiple months of rent up front here, while across the water tenants are benefiting from that, or they're going to be benefiting from that legislation soon. Yeah, can certainly share information on that. On the rental board, I'm sure Jerry can add to this, but I think our vision is that it would be representative of tenants, certainly with the aim of advocating for tenants, while also having a function to obviously mediate to some extent disputes between tenants and landlords, whether they're social or private landlords. Also conscious of the fact that Housing Rights has their own mediation service too, and not wanting to duplicate work. But it would be important that it's independent and has proper enforcement mechanisms, and I think a body with teeth is what's really needed.
Yeah, there'll be a general view, Ciara. I mean, obviously, ideally we'd like to include groups like Housing Rights. We haven't asked them. We've talked about the bill, but we haven't asked them directly about the be on a board. Groups like that, and I think it there could be a danger of an organisation like that being a bit of a talking shop, whereas we want to see one that's proactive and is open to private tenants. There's somewhere they can go and they can voice their concerns, and really there's limited avenues where they can do that currently. Housing Rights, great advocacy and mediation organisation and services, as Rebecca said, but in terms of actually taking action against landlords where necessary to support private tenants, there isn't really any organisation that can do that. Environmental health in certain circumstances, yes, but that's very, very limited. So yeah, we would like to see a body like that, and one that is really advocating for tenants and those who are living in the private rental sector and possibly social housing as well.
And just finally then, have you met with Lana yet, or is that to come?
Yeah, we've contacted them, so we're waiting on a word back to see what they say on our proposals.
No, thank you, and I wish you the very best. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andy then finally, and we are getting a wee bit tight again on time, so Andy, go ahead.
I'll try to be brief, Chair. Thanks. Jerry, just coming back maybe to the points, and I agree with others. Obviously, undoubtedly, there is a significant reliance here in Northern Ireland on the private rental sector, more so than there should be, which obviously does create a lot of those challenges that we're seeing, and I see those day and daily, and do agree that we need to see further regulation. But in terms of the rent control that you're suggesting, have you done any analysis of similar approaches in other jurisdictions worldwide? And is there any detail you can give us as to the positives or negatives?
Yep, we have a list, Andy, just checking the full countries here, isn't it? Sorry. There's been some rent control and rent reductions and rent limitations, different variations of that. We have a raised paper on that as well, that I don't know if members have seen that. We can share that with the committee if they want. But there's a couple of countries, Denmark, Malta, Sweden and Netherlands. Sweden and Netherlands have like a points-based rent control systems, and the Spanish government have a rent cap system for apartments and large areas in housing controlled by sort of bigger landlords. And the south, there's obviously rental pressure zones in the south, but it's quite limited, obviously. So there's policies that exist in other countries. We want to utilise the best, the strongest, and I think there's evidence that works. So I think there's a range of countries that's been introduced, and I think it should form part of the decision to look at the bill and look at implementing some form of rent controls. Anything to add on that? Or?
Just to add, yeah, just like Jerry said, it's possible to take the best bits of the systems that already exist and disregard the parts that have unintended consequences. So research to show that within tenancy rent control, so limits on rent increases just within a tenancy don't make rents affordable in the long run, because rents are then just tied to market levels. They'll just be bumped up once a property is put back in the market again, if that makes sense. So our position is that rent control should make rents affordable rather than just limiting that runaway uncontrollable growth. So our vision would be to link rent controls to a property rather than to a tenancy. You could also set a target rent level to be implemented over a period of time, whether that's months or years. And you could do that a couple of ways. You could reduce rents by like a fixed percentage below the current market level. So say rent rises are limited to 2% below median wage growth. That allows wage growth to sort of catch up with rental growth. Or you could, like this bill is proposing, set rents based on like a specific formula that reflects average income. So like a stepped annual decrease that brings rents down over time to 20% of median local incomes in the area. And then after that target's reached, then you can talk about the within tenancy rent control, so like setting an index to put caps on annual rent increases. So you could take like a multi-layered approach and monitor what's happening, monitor the impacts, and then adjust over time as needed. So yeah, it's like Jerry said, it's taking the bits that work best.
Yeah, and we've already heard, obviously Kelly has highlighted some concerns around the approach that you've highlighted may be contained in the bill, but will there be any analysis of, obviously for example, there's not one size fits all approach within the private rented sector. Some landlords may have a mortgage, and I know, Jerry, you've talked to the data that you have available in that regard. So the terms, the housing costs that landlords are paying out, for example, and their ability then to do repairs, would there be any analysis of that, or do you foresee doing that to make sure that there's no unintended consequences whereby rents are such a level then where landlords aren't then able to afford to do the repairs that they would be required to do that need to be done, and then actually has an unintended consequence in making sure that the property is at a standard that it should be?
Yeah, well, obviously we wouldn't want any unintended consequences, Andy. I mean, like I say, the stats from the housing executive show that 2/3 of landlords actually don't need the rental income to pay mortgage or to pay other costs. I mean, if there's certain exemptions in that, then we're keen to look at, and obviously it's an open consultation. We've had some landlord responses in that, so if there's specific cases where that's the case, but I would hazard a guess that landlords for the most part are still making money, decent bit of money off the private rent, because it's so high and so out of control. But if there's certain exemptions that you're have any evidence of or keen to share with, we're happy to look at that. I think the other point, just your earlier question about what doesn't work, I mean, it was Berlin, I think, was the case where there's a lot of kind of analysis to say the rent controls reductions and controls didn't work. Part of it because it was just in Berlin and people moved properties, and it wasn't in the whole of Germany or the whole region of that part of Germany. So that's why we're keen of having it obviously not across the north rather than just in one general area. I suppose that the other point, sort of general quick point, sure, is that, I mean, even if everything that we're consulting on was in the bill, which would be great, but that wouldn't solve the housing crisis, because these are longer term problems. They're been ongoing for generations, and obviously we want legislation from ourselves, from Ciara, from the Minister as well, to tackle this. But we'd say to people obviously as well, they need to be involved in tenant unions, need to be involved in groups like CAT2 and others, because we need a movement of people coming together to fight for better housing. And I think that's important in any sense, because there's obviously people who are trying to sectarianise the question of housing. There's people trying to blame our migrant asylum seeker brothers and sisters, and our point is that this is government inaction has led to a rise in housing, the price of housing and a lack of housing, and this is what we're attempting to deal with.
Yeah, in terms of some of the examples,
please.
What's wrong, sorry?
Briefly, please.
Yeah, sure. In terms of some of the examples you've highlighted, obviously I draw similarities to the research, and I've no doubt obviously you've done your own research, Jerry, but the similarities in the CIH report, I'm sure you've scrutinised that. Is there any comment you'd make to that? Because I think obviously their overall conclusion was 41 to 60% of landlords would potentially leave the sector, and again, obviously I'm not advocating, I do agree that we need greater regulation, but we need to do that in a balanced and proportionate way, especially at a time which you highlight yourself, we have a significant demand and need. We need to shift left. It's often highlighted and build more homes, build more social homes so people can move into. But have you analysed any of the data that they had highlighted?
Yes, we did. You'd be unsurprised to know. I think at the time, though, I think there was no evidence to support that this would happen in terms of landlords leaving the market. And like I said, the majority of landlords don't have mortgages to cover, according to the housing executive stats. And even if they do leave the sector, the house still exists. The house still remains. They don't take the house with them, and either the house will be sold to another landlord, or a first-time buyer if they're able to. I know it's harder for people to be first-time buyers, but it could be a first-time buyer of a property, obviously reducing demand on the private rented sector.
Just very quickly, Jay, if we can, because I'm on their time constraint, the use it or lose it comment that you made in relation to obviously derelict homes, do you foresee any exemptions in that? So what I'm thinking about is where obviously there are significant repairs needs to be done to a property that is unaffordable for the person that owns it. Do you see an exemption in that?
Well, we like this probably an exemption if, say, somebody's in hospital or care for a longer period of time and they're a landlord. There would probably be an exemption for that, but we don't want to follow repeat the example in Scotland where there's so many exemptions it becomes meaningless. And in terms of repairs, I mean, obviously, there's something we can look at, but I don't know if you want to add anything on the repairs.
We've asked the question
Yeah.
in the consultation survey about possible exemptions for that 6 month time period or whatever the time period might be. So we'll definitely include that in the report. It could not be.
I'm thinking of an instance where somebody's inherited a property, the state of repair is really bad, and obviously they don't have the financial capital to be able to invest in the property. Would it be fair that within a 6 month period they're required, or they're potentially going to be fined?
Yeah, it's a fair point, but I mean, also, is there any rent control in it? So, okay, if there's an exemption or there's a delay in that 6 month period, then what's going to happen to the rent? So,
Well, I'm not talking about a situation. You're talking about bringing the property, use it or lose it. So if it's land derelict, but there's no rent controls, they're not renting it out. It's land derelict, and they're working through various different repairs, but it's going to take greater than 6 months.
we'll certainly look at that. I mean, obviously, it's quite a specific question, but I mean,
It's things you need to consider, you know, as part
well,
of the
absolutely.
bill.
Well, there's a consultation now, so we obviously
Yeah.
followed that. So yeah.
It is in the consultation for sure.
Yeah. These are important matters that need to be considered as part of it, and obviously this is part of a consultation process, if you feel. So obviously there are important factors that need to be taken into consideration, and these are the unintended consequences that could arise if we don't consider them.
Yeah, I mean, most of these repairs, I'd imagine, are probably small repairs. I mean, there's probably certain examples you could give about major repairs that would take maybe more than 6 months, but I think for the most part they tend to be smaller repairs, but certainly fit into the consultation.
Okay, and then just on to the no-fault eviction, and again, I do believe that's an area where we need to see regulation and the exemptions that are in Scotland. And you talked about, obviously, then the rent board maybe analysing, you know, if a landlord has said they're going to sell a property and they don't then end up selling it, what do you envisage? Do you envisage that there would be a fine for that landlord if they don't go on to sell it? How do you
Well,
see
yeah,
that?
we're exploring it. You know, obviously we're working through how the Scottish model does work in detail. There's obviously problems with it, but we wouldn't be opposed to that, or I think that's something that we're keen to look at and explore.
Appreciate that. Thanks,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you, Andy. And members have picked up most of the outstanding ones that I was thinking about. One that does remain then is, what assessment have you made at this point, Jerry, in terms of financial implications for establishing and maintaining a rental control board?
The board, sorry, Chair?
Yeah.
Yes, obviously there'll be a cost to it, but I think it's something we can't afford not to do, given the scale of the housing crisis and what people are faced. I mean, obviously, if there's a rent reduction as well, you'll probably save money on, I would imagine, housing benefit, universal credit. So there's avenues where this could be funded, but I think given the scale of the housing crisis, given the fact that the executive has said it's a priority, I think they should be looking at a rental board with teeth, and it should be adequately and properly funded.
Okay, well, listen, thank you. Obviously, it's in the very early stages, and we look forward to seeing how it all develops. I want to thank you and Rebecca for coming along today and for engaging with members around those series of questions and for providing the information and the commitment to provide further pieces of information. So, I'm more leis agus gorma agaf. Okay, members, before we go into our next briefing session, then we're going to take just a very short comfort break there. So if we could come back in a couple of minutes again to restart with the gambling APG. Thank you. And Clerk.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Me. Happy days.
Chilton now.
Okay, members, so we are into broadcasting. We're at agenda item 11, which is the all-party group briefing to the committee on reducing harm related to gambling. So your briefing paper, member, starts at page 1467. I'd like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So Mr. Philip McGuigan, MLA, Chair of the All-Party Group, and Mr. Danny Donnelly, MLA, Secretary of the All-Party Group. We're also joined by Conor Hogan, I believe, is it? Who's the one?
He's on Zoom.
So we're joined by on Zoom by Conor Hogan, who's the all-party a member involved with the all-party group on reducing harm related to gambling. We'll just check that we have him on screen.
Yep.
Okay, and
Not by will yet.
we don't have anything through from Will yet. So, okay, so listen, we'll go back to yourself, Philip, and invite you to go ahead and make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
Will, I think, I'm not sure if Will's actually going to join online, or he might still appear before us, but thank you very much to the committee for inviting the APG on reducing harm related to gambling to brief us. I have a bit of an opening statement with a few asks for the committee intertwined with that. So I chair the APG. I'm joined by our secretary, Danny Donnelly, and Connor's online, and will hopefully appear online or in person. So members of the APG are made up of the 5 main parties in the Assembly, and we work very constructively to address issues associated with gambling harm within our communities. So it's important to note that the APG is not anti-gambling, but concerned with reducing the harms associated with gambling. According to the 2016 Gambling Prevalence Survey, 2.3% of our population here in the North suffer from gambling harm, which amounts to around 40,000 individuals. While this is likely an underestimated number of gambling harm in the North, at that time it is still more than 4 times higher than that recorded in Britain, and almost 3 times higher than recorded in the South. Recent data from other parts of these islands suggest that the situation is getting worse. 2023 study from the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin found that 3.3% of adults in the South now suffer gambling harm, and new data from the Gambling Commission in Britain finds that 2.5% of the adult population in Britain suffer gambling harm, 8 times higher than previously thought. And we also know from a recent young person's behaviour and attitude survey that 30% of 11 to 16-year-olds in the North have gambled in some form or other in the last 12 months. We understand that a gambling prevalence survey has been conducted, and our first ask is that we ask the committee to call on the department to publish the findings of this survey as a matter of urgency, so that we and yourselves and others will have a better understanding of the scale of gambling harm and thus inform gambling policy. So in the context of where we are here in the North with regard to legislation, we have been described as the Wild West for gambling, because we have recently seen in the Oireachtas passing landmark gambling regulation last year. The North is now the only jurisdiction on these islands without updated gambling legislation since the advent of the internet. So online gambling, as you'll be aware, continues to be unregulated here. The Minister has been clear that there is insufficient legislative time in the current Assembly mandate to take forward a comprehensive gambling bill. Officials from the Department for Communities told this committee at its meeting on the 21st of November 2024 work on drafting this legislation is not expected to begin until the next mandate. That's our second ask. We would ask the committee to ask the Minister to allocate adequate resources to conduct the necessary preparatory work for drafting this major piece of legislation, so that in the next mandate it's good to go from the beginning. There are other important steps that the Department can take in the remainder of this mandate without the need for primary legislation that would help protect our population from gambling harms. This includes the publication of the final version of the initial Gambling Code of Practice, which the Department has just consulted on. In our response, the APG welcomed the publication of the initial code, which provides much needed protections for our population. However, as it is currently drafted, the code doesn't outline the reporting process for non-compliance, specifying which authorities or bodies should be approached by different types of breaches of the code or how to approach them. Furthermore, it lacks explicit guidance on what constitutes serious, significant, continuing or multiple breaches that would warrant the revocation of or cancellation of a licence, registration or permit of a gambling operator. Nor does it have clear guidelines for the PSNI, district councils and the courts on how to assess these breaches. So the code will rely on individuals or organisations reporting potential cases of non-compliance on an ad hoc basis as and when they are discovered. The Department, as de facto regulator, needs to take a proactive approach in monitoring breaches. This could be achieved in part, for example, by instituting a test purchase scheme or schemes similar to those used to monitor alcohol licensing here in the north. I think maybe even tobacco as well. As of August 2024, land-based gambling operators in Britain are required to undergo age verification test purchasing regardless of the size of the operation. So without a robust process for monitoring compliance, reporting non-compliance and clear guidance to the relevant statutory authorities on how to assess breaches of the code, we think that it will be ineffective. Draft code also lacks any reference to gaming machines. This is a disappointing omission, given that the previous draft code of practice, which was subject to consultation in 2022, importantly reiterated the department's position that electronic gaming machines, FOBTs as we call them, are gaming machines under the 1985 order. As such, they should be subject to much lower stakes and prizes as provided for under our current gambling laws, rather than offering maximum stakes of £2 and maximum prizes of £500, as many licensed gambling operators in the north currently do. I mean, these have been described as the crack cocaine of gambling. So, third ask, we are asking the committee to raise our concerns around the code of practice with the Minister. Another step the department can take to address gambling harms is the introduction of an industry levy on licensed and permitted gambling operations here in the north, as provided for in the 22 Act, land-based gambling establishments. This will require further consultation and secondary legislation to be enacted. In a meeting with members of the APG in April, officials from the department said that the levy will be informed by the Gambling Prevalence Survey. So another example of why we need to see this survey. So ask 4 is that the APG asked the committee to urge the Minister to publish the proposals for an industry levy without delay. So, Chair, I'm nearly at the end. We welcome the representations from the Minister of Communities, together with the other colleagues in the Executive, Minister for Health and Minister for Education, to the British Secretary of Culture, Media and Sport, asking that the North receives a share of the statutory levy on gambling operators to be introduced in Britain. This levy, announced in 2024, is expected to raise $100 million for research, prevention and treatment of gambling harms. Under the current proposals, the levy would cover England, Scotland and Wales, doesn't cover here. So the APG has reminded the British Secretary of State in correspondence that the British Government has a duty of care to individuals and communities here in the North who are exposed to marketing by online gambling operators licensed by the Commission in Britain. And finally, I'm happy to report that representatives from each of the 5 main parties have tabled a cross-party private members' motion on supporting a public health approach to tackling gambling-related harms, and this is due for debate on Tuesday, the 28th of January. We hope the members of this committee will support our motion and work constructively with the Department for Communities and the Executive to protect our people from gambling harms.
And I have to say on behalf of the committee, I think I welcome the work that the APG does in relation to this issue. It is one that I have to say I'd be quite concerned about as well. I would be extremely concerned, as you have touched upon, in relation to the issue of children and that access to online and that increasing access to online. I also am very conscious of even television, broadcasting ads, middle of the day ads, advertising bingo games at what appear to be small amounts of money on the surface, but you just think of multiple repetitions of that could very, very quickly escalate. And I'm hugely concerned about what you stated as, and we're very conscious of this, around the lack of regulation. And I have to say, I would be disappointed. I'm not convinced that, for example, the recent OLAS article from the Institute of Public Health describes it as a significant public health risk right across the island. And I think, given here in the north of the island, we don't have that robust regulation. It is something that needs to be treated as a matter of urgency. Taking on board what you've said around the legislation in this mandate, what do you think the Department and Minister need to be doing during the remainder of this mandate to prepare to ensure that we are ready to hit the ground running with regulation and legislation in a new mandate, which is regrettably the situation we're in? What needs to happen now to ensure that's taking place?
Well, Chair, just as I pointed out, I mean, we have met with the Minister. We have accepted that it's a lengthy and substantial piece of legislation, and it won't come through in this mandate. But but that shouldn't stop the department making preparations and ensuring that they have the resources within the department to prepare for the legislation, because the last thing that we want, given that we are the only part of these islands that doesn't have internet updated regulation, is that we get to the start of the next mandate and then there's an issue of resources, there's an issue of preparedness, and an issue of time within the next mandate. I mean, you identified something that I didn't even raise, and that's the issue of advertisement. I mentioned the regulation came in the south, and they have taken the decision to ban advertising on TV and radio from 5 a.m. until 9 p.m. and they have also taken the decision, to stop advertising at events where there are likely to be children at. And advertising for us is a reserve policy. We have written recently again to the gambling minister to ask that similar scenario has been enacted in the south would be enacted here and indeed in Britain, because we recognise that the regulation in the south is very welcome, but we also recognise that a lot of people will watch television that isn't under the control of the south, particularly sport. So citizens down there still will be bombarded by gambling advertising. So in terms of, this covers an awful range of departments. The public health obviously covers education, it covers the Department for Health, it covers other executive departments. With regard to the legislation and the question you asked, that's specifically within the Department for Communities, and we would just urge, as you have cautioned, that we don't sit in our hands with regard to preparing for the legislation, but we have outlined some things. We did have an updated legislation for land-based gambling establishments, and we want to see that enacted as full as it can, and the code of practice needs to be strong enough to do what was intended to do there, Chair.
Yep. Thank you. And before I go to members then, the final one from me, we recognise, and we always do recognise, that communities is a huge department with a wide range of areas of activity under its remit. However, at a recent session here, we did have officials in relation to gambling and the work on gambling. I think there was 2 or maybe 3 of them, just from memory. And when we drilled into it in terms of how many people within the department, and it is a sizable department, despite all those large issues, it appeared that was really the people we were looking at were the department's resource in this huge area. And again, going back to it being a public health issue, do you think that's satisfactory? Do you think that needs addressed urgently in order to make sure that preparation work can be done effectively?
Absolutely. I mean, I want to put on record the department officials are very good attenders at our APG and are very constructive at our APG and very helpful. But just to kind of echo the point that you made, that, if this is to be, because we have kind of stalled in the previous 2 mandates because of the size of this legislation. So it is a substantial piece of legislation, and it should be matched by resources within the department. We have legislation in the south. There's movement across the water. There are examples of best practice. So we just need the people within the department to give it the seriousness that it has, to, as I say, just to ensure that we do not waste a 3rd mandate on this very, very important. I mean, because I outlined the figures at the start. I don't want to hype the thing by saying gambling is an epidemic here, but there are a substantial amount of people suffering from gambling-related harm, and statistics show that for every individual suffering harm, that transmit to 6 people, whether it's friends, family, work colleagues. Gambling is a public health issue. It impacts on employment, it impacts on our work sector, it impacts within education, it impacts within our health system, and it impacts within our judiciary system. So legislation to combat all of that is important.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go now to members. I have first of all Kelly, then I'm coming to Brian. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that update from the all-party group. to be honest, I deliberately didn't sit in the all-party group because the last term I was on the committee that was looking at the legislation. And you're absolutely right, while we're not anti-gambling, we certainly are looking to protect people from the harm that can come from gambling. And I think in the last mandate, if I remember rightly, we had decided as a committee that yes, it was a health issue and it should be treated as such. But my question to you guys is, there was a lot of information that was put through in the last legislation, as you talked about, on land-based gambling. And in fact, earlier today, I had asked if we could write and get an update on the provisions of the legislation compared to what had been done and what still has to be done. And I asked about if the National Lottery would be considered as a land-based operator, given the fact that it's based in the UK. My concern with all of this, and it came out from all members of the last committee, was online safety. Now, we know that the online safety bill is being progressed through Westminster, and the online safety bill may have an amount. Have you had anything from the Minister to suggest that the reason why he's not taking it forward is waiting to see what happens with all of that over in Westminster?
We have received nothing that is the reason. I say the APG met the Minister and he outlined, his intention at that point to deal with the land-based regulations that were enacted by the Assembly, but his rationale and reason for the not progressing the online aspect of it was that he just didn't have the time.
Sorry, can I
come in? Bit concerning, yeah. Sorry, Danny.
Just to add to that, one of the recent things that the legislation in the South has done is to ban gambling ads on social media unless you're actually following a gambling account. So I think that is something that we should be looking at as well. Certainly, that's a way of reducing the amount of gambling ads that people will see. Certainly, we've heard a lot of families who have had issues. We've heard a lot, taken evidence from a lot of families that have their social media streams are just flooded with these gambling ads. So I think that's a step that the South has taken that certainly would be productive.
Okay, that online system is just too available. It's 24 hours a day. You don't know who's doing it or what's doing it. It's very difficult to control, and colluding for people under 18. So it worries me that we're not moving that forward, and I'll certainly ask the committee later on if they would support the proposals that you put forward, to ask the Minister to at least draft and get something ready for the next mandate. The other thing, the advertising one, I know when we did the liquor licensing, so-called liquor licensing, we did, advertising was banned in several different places as a result of that. Where else would you prefer that advertising to disappear from? I know you've mentioned social media, but the land-based, I'm trying to think, 48-sheet posters, you don't really see the lottery and things on that. Is there anywhere else? Because I know that I'm trying to think where else we can target to take.
We are in a peculiar situation here in that, in Britain there's the Gambling Commissioner, and in the South there's now a gambling regulator. So in Britain the Gambling Commissioner sets the guidelines and the regulations with regard to advertising and how gambling companies operate, and that is regulated by the Advertising Standards Agency. Yeah. And there's a very grey area about that regulation here in the North, because the Gambling Commission doesn't have regulatory powers here. We've met with the ASA and expressed our concerns, and we're probably still in the position where we think that we haven't got the oversight of gambling companies when it comes to advertising here in the North, which is why the Code of Practice is vitally important. You've touched on the online aspect of it, and it is worrying, and it's why we do need a bill. We're also disappointed, as I say, we wrote to DCMS and the Gambling Minister. We literally only got a response back yesterday with regard to advertising, and they talked about the ban on the front of shirts coming into Premier League soccer in early or at the end of this season, and a few other things. But it seemed from the response they sent to us that they're not planning on taking forward similar types of advertising legislation as in the case in the South. But as I say, we would be proposing that a ban on advertising similar to the South 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. 5 minutes before that and after, if it's likely to be watched by children. Danny talked about social media. That's a key aspect because young people now are getting all of their information on social media and can be bombarded. I mean, I have gambling blocking on my social media, but stuff seeps through. So, we need to be very careful of that. Newspaper advertising, radio advertising, particularly. I mean, I think the GAA have provided a really good example in terms of their work banning gambling from shirts and grounds, etc., etc. So, I mean, young people, and not just young people, we're a sport-mad society, and people are bombarded by gambling, and that, the amount of money that gambling companies make allows them to pump millions and hundreds of millions into advertising, and they wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't successful. I mean, we had the scenario there over Christmas where Luke Littler, who's only 17, won the World Darts Championship sponsored by a gambling company. Took part in an event where it was just gambling advertising from start to finish.
I know that one of the frustrations that I had, in fact a lot of the committee members had the last time, is that subliminal type gambling that happens in every supermarket or newsagent you go into, and you've got the National Lottery scratch cards there beside chewing gum and sweets on the counter, and we know that it's outside of our remit because that falls to DCMS in Westminster to legislate on, but I sort of felt like we were toothless in that because they say how it works, but we don't want them sitting on the counter. They should be like cigarettes and be behind a screen. But no, thank you very much for your update today. There's certainly a lot more that we have to do, taking forward whatever we can, and to support the Minister to take forward whatever he's going to bring forward.
On that issue, I mean, that's why we want a public health approach taken to gambling, because, tobacco used to be the gambling in terms of sports advertising. I mean, I'm old enough to remember growing up watching darts, snooker,
Formula One.
all of that was bombarded with tobacco advertising. There was a public health approach taken to that, and that has addressed that issue, and we want gambling to be treated from a public health perspective in the same way that alcohol and tobacco is.
Yeah, and I have to say, just like a couple of the things that really sort of highlighted to me the importance and the pernicious and insidious nature of gambling. So the addiction piece. One of the events that you ran, your APG ran a couple of years ago, highlighted the levels of suicide directly associated with gambling, and also, and just this is a follow up from Kelly's point around the gambling, but also the relationship, kind of individual relationship with people who are highly addicted to gambling, and that kind of insidious reaching out to them when they notice a drop in the gambling, even and in some of the radio sections I heard, even providing free gambling. It's almost the equivalent of the cigarette companies coming to someone who's quit and giving them a free pack of cigarettes. Yep. What's your view on that in terms of how that is really imperative for people who are really, really struggling with it?
I mean, absolutely, and I should have said in response to Kelly when she was talking about the subliminal and within supermarkets. I mean, we in some of our inquiries into gaming machines talked and took evidence on, the fact that I have to be very careful of the language that I use, but essentially grooming of young people through loot boxes and, the types of gaming machines that or the games that young people would be playing with regard to rewards within those games, which, subliminally is teaching them, you do this, you get a reward, etc., etc. So it's essentially, in my language, grooming for gambling. But in terms of the point that you were making, absolutely, and that's why the online regulation is needed. That's why we described it currently as the Wild West. Free bets should be a thing of the past. That is encouraging people into gambling. The issue of the types of games. Because some people out there talk about problem gambling, and I talk about gambling harm, because for me the problem isn't with the individual, the problem's with the industry in terms of the way it's set, particularly online, and that lots of the machines, the gambling, the games online now are specifically designed to ensure that they attract the most aggressive type of play, the biggest volume of money, and to keep the person playing. So free enticements is certainly causing harm and should be a thing of the past. I can certainly speak of personal experience and know of lots of others who have been bombarded, as you have pointed out, by gambling companies, maybe when they wanted to take a break or whatever. You're maybe sent an email with an adjustment back, and so free bets, inducements, proper self-exclusion principles, I think is key moving forward. I mean, there are lots of things that as an APG we would like to see in a new online gambling bill, and we will certainly, along with this committee, be playing a full part to ensure that whatever legislation comes in the next mandate, hopefully we're all re-elected, that it serves the people that we represent.
Thank you. So just before I come to you, Danny, Conor has had his hand up on screen, and just to let Morris know, we've got your indication, Morris, and we'll bring you in sequence as well, but I'll go to Conor first and then I'll come back to you, Danny.
No problem. Thank you everybody for having me. I just wanted to return just very quickly to one of Philip's points, because we're talking a lot about online advertising, and we've learned through the APG and the evidence that we've received that this is indeed one of the greatest sources of the most severe harm. People talk about, you can walk around nowadays with a casino in your pocket, so to speak. The accessibility, particularly for young people as well, who've grown up in the internet age, they're so digitally literate that the exposure that they get via, social media and even just sort of regular betting sites and apps is a very severe source of harm. And it's notable, therefore, that the North, there still is no effective regulation on online advertising, and there's a huge opportunity that we can't really afford to miss with a future bill. But in the meantime, and Philip touched on this is also going back to the codes of practice. One of the areas that I think would be one of our sort of goals in the short term is to try to resolve the grey area that Philip mentioned that exists at the minute, which is the question of what happens when there's a breach in the current guidelines, right? So if there's an operator advertising to individuals here and they are in breach of the ASA guidelines, which is what the proposed codes from the department point to, because of what Philip said, this jurisdictional problem where it's down to, they refer to the Gambling Commission, but the Gambling Commission doesn't have enforcement powers here. It means that individuals and consumers here really have no one to go to. And even with correspondence with the PSNI as well, they've made it clear that online advertising is not within their powers either. So in the sort of short to medium term, there's a real problem here that needs to be raised and resolved over accountability when there is a breach when it comes to online advertising.
And just to say before I bring Danny in, we are in receipt of a letter. It hasn't gone out to members yet, but we're in receipt of a letter back from the Gambling Commission indicating that they are not intending to come here. So I think we can safely see that as a kind of a further indication of that gap is going to continue to exist. Danny, go ahead before we go back to members, please.
Thank you very much. I wanted to pick up on your analogy first, the one where you said we wouldn't dream about giving away free cigarettes, and we wouldn't. And that's because we know smoking is a dangerous product, and it does cause harm. So similar to that analogy, it is very same, and we should not be giving away free gambling. That should absolutely not happen. It is a product that can be harmful, and we all know technology has now improved to the point where we carry devices that are effectively 24-hour gambling devices and can be used for that if somebody wants to do that in their own home all night, every night. It's not just time constrained. As somebody that wasn't involved in sport beforehand, I didn't have a lot of experience with gambling, so it wasn't something that was really on my radar before I joined this APG. Now, doing some research online has now meant that my social media timelines get flooded with these ads. Now, I'm not a gambler, but because I've been looking at gambling sites and because I've investigated gambling on social media just for my own interest, and because of things that we've had on evidence, I'm getting these ads all the time. You know, so that they're sent out there and just thrown out to try and catch people and entice people into it, and done so in a way that's generally sort of humorous ad-wise, and they try to promote engagement, and sometimes it can even be cartoony, you know, and you do kind of see the line of, this would almost be trying to entice children. You know, there are cartoon ads that are kind of thrown out there that this is fun and this makes sport even better to watch. You know, so it is very concerning in the way that these ads are thrown out to people who are not involved.
Yeah, and just let me add that the example I'm citing there from the incident I heard in the radio, this wasn't even advertising. This was where someone who had, and he was on the radio explaining about the gambling, about the difficulties he was experiencing. He was considered prestige customers, or something to that effect. Yeah, and this was a phone call. This was a phone call from a relationship manager who phoned me to say, I noticed you have my back, there's nothing to do with the company, but by the way, I'm going to stick £200 onto your account, just in case you might need it or want it. And that's the level, and that really, really concerns me and needs to be addressed.
VIP customers, they're called, and gambling companies would have VIP managers where they would... I've used this statistic, and there's varying degrees of it, but the majority of profit that a gambling company makes, 80-90% of the profit is from 4 to 5% of gamblers. Those are the VIP customers. Those are the people that gambling companies want to, and that is what we're trying to do, is reduce the harm, particularly within that cohort of people.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Philip, Danny, for attending today, and the others too. So I have a few questions just on your presentation, and certainly even if the major legislation is not progressing in this mandate, we should still be doing all we can to advance things as much as possible. In terms of the code of conduct or code of practice, how would you describe that? Is that just a good practice guide, or will it have any teeth? And who will have the powers? Will it be councils in Northern Ireland? How effective is it likely to be?
I'll briefly touch on that, and then I'll ask Connor, because he drafted our submission with regard to it. It should have powers. I should start off by saying that. What I outlined at the beginning was our concern that perhaps it's not going to be effective and powerful enough. In terms of the question, the licensing authority should be the responsible, but there is this problem about who actually is overall responsible for various aspects within the code, and what we're essentially saying is, with regard to, or who even to go to, who an individual even goes to. So we want all of that specified within the code when it comes before us again, so that an individual will know exactly who to go to if there's a breach or of a particular aspect of the code. And as I said, we want the department to actually police it. So the same way that a licensing authority would do with regard to tobacco or drink, and none of that's in the code at the minute. So from our point of view, it's a bit toothless at the minute, and what we're here today to ask you is to support us and to ensure that when it comes, that there are a bit stronger teeth included. Probably Connor may well have more to elaborate on that.
And sorry, in terms of the statutory authority, is it only the councils currently? There is no gambling commission, obviously. There's nobody except the councils, really, and then the department has a responsibility for the matter, but there's no body set up.
No, and as I say, that's one thing that we would hope that we would get within any new online gambling legislation, that we would have, a gambling regulator, a gambling commissioner, or whatever you would want to call it. That's something that we certainly think is necessary, that when we have legislation, that we have somebody independent to oversee it and police it and ensure that it is kept, because at the minute there is this grey area between councils, the department, the PSNI, about actually who's responsible for what, and as a result of that, nobody's responsible.
Just check, I know you wanted to bring in Connor, but before that, I see Will has joined. Will, do you want to join Philip and Danny here at the table? Or you?
Go ahead.
So Connor, Philip was suggesting you come in on that point there.
Yes, thanks very much, Philip. So the codes as they currently stand, so a breach of the codes doesn't result automatically in a revocation of a license, for example, or consequences like that, but it can be used as evidence in a court case, or when the relevant body then is deciding to renew a license. In fact, it has to take into account any breaches of the code of practice. So that's how it's sort of framed in terms of generally where it slots in. But as Philip said, one of the major, and it should be said as well, that in terms of the actual provisions of the code, I don't think that there were many concerns raised by the members. It's not the sort of substantive content of the codes that is the issue, but really it's on enforcement and also monitoring as well. So monitoring is quite important. Currently, the way the codes seem to be written, it is down to individual members really of the public to sort of take it upon themselves whenever they spot a breach in the codes to report it, which is problematic because they're not always going to be resourced to do that. And also some of these people are actually going to be the most vulnerable people in society. So if we take self-exclusion measures, for example, by nature, the first people who are going to spot when a regulator isn't instituting a self-exclusion regime is going to be people who are requesting to be self-excluded. So we can't put all of this pressure on individuals and the local bodies to monitor compliance with the codes. That's one thing. And I think as the sort of de facto regulator, it should be down to the department in the first place to either to resource monitoring of compliance with the codes, or at the very least to provide detailed guidance in the codes as to how to report a breach, who to report it to. Because as Philip said as well, it can get complex depending on different types of licenses, different types of venues. There are different bodies. It can fall to sort of the local councils, or in certain cases the PSNI or the department, depending on what the specific breach, say, is. So there needs to be very sort of specific guidance in the codes for that in terms of monitoring. And then in terms of enforcement, similarly, there's a grey area at the minute, is the way that Philip put it. And at the minute, yeah, depending on what provision is in breach, it's unclear at times who is meant to be in charge of enforcing it. And at times, even when a body is named, there's reluctance. So, for example, in the case of gaming machines, we've had a bit of reluctance at times, I think it's fair to say, from the PSNI and the courts to enforce some of the provisions around stakes and prizes, which they are named as being the responsible bodies for. So more guidance in the first place is needed in the codes. And I think in the interest maybe of keeping this brief, just to sort of summarize, as I said, there's no problem in the substantive, or there's few problems in the substantive content of the codes, but currently they risk being a bit toothless without serious measures to monitor compliance and enforcement, and guidelines as to how this is meant to work and who is the relevant body in different cases of different breaches.
I think the fact that the prevalence studies are only taking place every 6 years is a huge concern as well, particularly in light of the emergence now, the full-blown emergence of AI. A lot of harms and a lot of increases and a lot of changes could happen within a 6-year period. I think that's something of concern as well. Brian, back to you.
In terms of online gambling, the Gambling Commission then is regulating these effectively across the UK. Is there any online gambling in Northern Ireland which isn't effectively under the Gambling Commission because it's based, either in GB or even down south.
Online remote gambling is unregulated in Northern Ireland, period.
But it is regulated if it's emanating from GB, is that fair to say?
Well, it's regulated in GB, so if a gambling operator, remote gambling, online gambling operator is in breach of their licence in terms of impacting an individual in Northern Ireland, the Gambling Commission has no jurisdiction in this place, or no authority in this jurisdiction.
But if their practice was seen as particularly harmful, they would be regulated at the GB level.
The GB, but not at Northern Ireland level.
And I get the need to.
So people here, citizens here, don't have the same. Well, have no redress as far as the Gambling Commission is concerned, and that crosses over to the advertising as well, which is a grey area. Essentially, Northern Ireland is a grey market when it comes to gambling, not a black market, a grey market.
Last question. In terms of the levy, the industry levy, gambling levy, I see their executive ministers have asked for Northern Ireland to get a share of the levy on remote gambling operators, but physical venues here in Northern Ireland won't be paying any part of that. Is that coming? That was just announced in November. Has it come into effect?
Right. The proposal, the gambling levy or the statutory levy in GB is currently only relates to England, Scotland, and Wales. It doesn't cover this place. What I think the executive ministers were calling for was that Northern Ireland get a share of that levy. Share of the levy given by that'll be levied on remote gambling operators, and the reason the focus on remote gambling operators is because any remote gambling operator company wishing to advertise into Northern Ireland must be licensed by the Gambling Commission. But should a remote gambling operator be in breach of their license in breach of their license and impact an individual in Northern Ireland, that they won't they have no jurisdiction there. And I think it's also important to note, obviously in Northern Ireland we now have provision for a levy in the 2022 legislation on land-based operators.
And is there any sign of that progressing?
That was one of our asks, Brian. Essentially what we're saying is that we want the Minister to bring forward the levy on land-based gambling establishments here in the absence of our own bill. We're asking because, as you pointed out, a lot of the companies are profiteering online from gamblers from the north. So we think that we should get a percentage of the levy, and that levy should be used for education, treatment, and as the chair pointed out, information and statistics, because not only do we lag way behind with regard to legislation, we lag way behind with information and about the harm and the impact of it. And again, I keep coming back to the public health approach. It's not just within the Department for Communities in terms of the prevalence survey and all of that. It's even within GP surgeries and hospitals. We just don't know the full extent and the true extent of the harm caused by gambling.
Okay, thank you. So listen, I'm getting a wee bit conscious of time now. We have three members still, so I'm going to the Deputy Chair, Ciara. Go ahead, Ciara.
I'll try and be succinct. So just thank you very much. And I'd like to commend the work of the All-Party Group. It's fantastic work in ensuring it's kept high on the agenda in relation to, particularly as a public health issue, but likewise the huge harm that it's having across our families and our communities and our neighbourhoods. And I would be keen, obviously, in moving forward regarding we need an independent gambling regulation here in the north, and I'm conscious the two phrases to me even throughout here that today is the north is the Wild West when it comes to it, and likewise the casino in your pocket is the two kind of key things for me that are cutting. Just in relation to your detailed papers, the one area in relation to your third ask around the code of practice, there was kind of a key areas, because I was working with the likes of Kelly and Andy here, there's Kernan in the committee in our last committee within the department. Key areas that are missing within the code of practice, and you highlight the likes of the fixed betting terminals, the gaming machines, the gambling on credit, the ATMs within the premises stuff. Is there any reasoning behind why they haven't been included in the code of practice from the department? So that's one question. And then just secondly, you also mentioned regarding debt respite, because obviously coming with gambling harm, it's the impact, obviously huge impact on mental health, and particularly then huge debt that people have, and we don't even want to think of the dire consequences that could have on individuals. So is there any movement through the department on the debt respite scheme? So them two questions would be useful. Thank you.
I'll take the debt respite, and Will or Connor if they want to take the first one. I mean, we're not even sure about the movement within the department. I mean, that we didn't ask you that specifically, but I mean that's something that we would be pursuing, and we'd hope that you would pursue it as well, because the chair talked about the levels of suicide from gambling, particularly males, but not exclusively. And obviously, gambling causes a lot of harm, but one of the major harms is debt, and people feel that they are in a hole that they can't get out of. So a debt respite scheme would be a very welcome help for this aspect, but for lots of other people across society as well, to get them out of a hole that they feel they're in.
Yeah. And then on the first, Connor, yep.
Yep. Just to pick up, in terms of omissions from the code of practice, so there are some provisions still in there on ATMs and credit, albeit maybe reduced. I know that the code of practice itself that we've received in the most recent consultation is a much smaller document than, if you remember, the previous code of practice that went out for consultation in 2022. Now, in discussion with the APG, some of the representatives from the department did cite this as a potential advantage, because I think part of the idea is if we have sort of a small but targeted code of practice, then this can allow for some agility, without having to refer back to sort of primary legislation. But again, without just getting back to one of the central points, without effective monitoring or enforcement, that sort of completely undermines that. On the gaming machines, I would agree. I wouldn't presume to speculate as to why it hasn't been included. I know that there are many. We when we did our inquiry, when the AGM did their inquiry, APG, pardon me, on gaming machines, there was a wide variety of stakeholders with different and sometimes opposing views. So I do know that the department has a lot to contend with in terms of what different stakeholders want. But for us, it was a particularly disappointing omission because along with online gambling, gaming machines, as was conclusively, I think, shown in our previous inquiry on them, are enormously damaging to individuals and communities, and are a very, very severe source of harm. I mean, there lots of research we came across sort of substantiating this, but one that always stuck out to me was there was a piece of research, I'll have to refer back to the report to get it exactly, but that seemed to suggest that around half, maybe, let me, I will send you the source itself just so that I don't make myself hostage to fortune, but that maybe around half, I think, of users of these fixed odd betting terminals, so-called, are either at risk or problem gamblers, So nearly the majority, nearly over half are of the people who actually use these products are experiencing gambling harm. So therefore, it was a very disappointing omission that the code of practice doesn't make any sort of reference to these.
Thank you, Connor.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. And Sean. please.
Yeah, quite a few of my questions have already been answered, so I'll not repeat them. First of all, I just want to say a really big thank you to the All Party Group and to yourself, Rob, and just the passion and the commitment that you have to this topic is incredible. I wanted to reiterate as well, Chair, the comment that you had said. It's what I'd written down about the frequency of reviews. I think 6 years is absolutely ridiculous for this context, and how quickly this changes and how quickly it mutates and with algorithms, and as Danny pointed out, all you have to do is one search and all of a sudden you're flooded. The other thing I wanted to mention that hadn't been mentioned was children's games on app stores. So you have obviously age ranges on the app store, and as a parent of an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old who are using the iPads or whatever, I was so shocked to see solitaire games where you can get down, the money from PayPal, the money from the game goes into a PayPal, being advertised on a game that was on the App Store for a 3-year-old. So it's things like that where it's not just the advertisements, it's the actual games that are coming up that all they have to do is press a button, that are available through the App Store. So I think that's again something. But my big worry when it comes to this is that the online regulatory kind of world is so difficult, because where does the actual jurisdiction lie? Because if you have these companies offshore, not on these islands, where does that regulatory piece fall to? Where's the onus on and the responsibility? And then, Chair, I know that the comment about the Gambling Commission has already been made, so I'll look forward to seeing that letter. That was going to be one of my questions, was if not a Gambling Commission, who? And really, I don't, if the department has already said that they don't have the resources for that, and they don't have the resources for the bill, do they have the resources for oversight and responsibility? So that's just a few of them, but I know that that'll maybe wait until the letter comes through in our pack. Chair, but yeah, it's just really that inclusion of the apps that are actually then linked to the age restricted apps on the likes of iTunes or the Google Android, whatever store.
So, I mean, we live in a very fast evolving, developing world, and as legislators, we need to be agile enough to adapt to the changes. And I mean, at the minute we're not with regard to this topic. That's clear. So, I mean, the bit about the apps is kind of what I talked about earlier with regard to, it's a similar scenario of the loot boxes, the inducements. It's all about teaching, coaching. So, I mean, there's an aspect that would need to be regulated with an online bill as well as a gambling bill. I mean, the North does need a regulator. It absolutely needs a regulator, because there's no point having any type of legislation unless somebody is regulating it. You pointed a key problem in that, particularly online. No, this is a global issue. I mean, I pointed out that we're now currently the only part of these islands, so it's a good thing that the South has legislation and regulation, and it's a good thing that Britain has, and it's moving towards it, because we are interconnected. So we can learn from those, but we need the same protections, and that is key. So that's something we must have, and we absolutely need a regulator here to ensure that we have those protections once we get the legislation right. So we will all, as MLAs, play an important role scrutinising whatever bill comes before the Assembly. And I mean, one thing that we have is we have a very good APG with cross-party support. Anytime there's debates in the Assembly, I think this is an issue that we all, across all parties, recognise as something that we need to tackle in support of protecting our children and our vulnerable citizens.
Thank you, and thank you, Sean. And Morris then. Morris, just checking that you're hearing us there online okay, and come on ahead. Yep.
I'm seeing you as well.
Good stuff.
Chair, thanks for the presentation. I didn't hear the start of it, so if I repeat anything, please apologise, and I will try and be brief. Look, as somebody who played football and didn't drive, I played a game in the morning league, and to play a game in the afternoon league, the pick-up point was the local bookies. And I'm not a gambler. I've never gambled I don't see any sense in it, but that's just my makeup. And I do appreciate that people can be addicted to it. But our current legislation is so far out of date, it's not relevant at all to today's society. We were debating in the chamber this week about deepfake videos and the advancements of AI, etc., etc. No matter how we develop a legislation to cope with this here, it's going to be out of date the minute it's published. So I would like to see the Assembly adopt a more proactive approach, whereby we look for the problems before they occur, rather than trying to cure the problems after they have occurred. And I have to give respect to everybody in the APN for working on this here. And I know that some of the members are passionate about this here, and I would agree with them. One thing it really concerns me is the amount of agencies involved currently. You have the councils, the courts, the department itself, etc., etc. And now the PSNI they have expressed a desire to move away from enforcement responsibilities to a dedicated agency, recognising how gambling affects people and socially, economically, and their mental health. So we really are at the crossroads. Can I ask the panel, how do they see the developing regulations in GB and the need to, how can I say it, cooperate with the Republic of Ireland because of the online gambling across the border, etc., with two jurisdictions? How can we merge that together for the benefit of everybody?
Yep. Great. Go ahead, Philip.
Okay. I'm conscious I'm doing probably a lot of talking, but I mean, that's a very good point, Morris. We are interconnected, so we follow the same sports, we watch the same televisions, by and large we're reading the same stuff online, so there's no point in having totally different scenarios or sets of legislation, which is why we were disappointed at the response we got from the DCMS across the water with regard to the advertising piece, because we would have liked them to have followed suit with regard to the South, because advertising is key to this. It's what's driving people into gambling, and that's essentially then where the harm comes from. So as I said earlier, just to repeat it, because we're behind, we can learn from the experiences of the South and across the water in developing what you clearly pointed out is legislation that needs to be future-proofed, it needs to be agile, and it needs to have enough scope to deal with continuing advances within this sector. So I mean, I think that's key moving forward, and we would love to see symmetry across these islands. I'd even go further. As I said, this is a global issue, so there needs to be regulation with regard to online gambling practices that are global in nature.
Thank you, Melissa.
Just one more quick one, if that's.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Morris. Right, okay. Go.
Sorry. It was alluded to that they were running around with a casino in their pockets. We're actually running around with a mini computer, not only a casino, a computer, but also a bank. So we can take money out of our accounts and transfer it via online. So it's a major problem, especially online. Could I ask, how confident is the panel in actually getting a dedicated regulator to deal with us here in Northern Ireland? As opposed to a willy-nilly catch-all approach, somebody dedicated to look into this here and develop strategies the whole way across the board, which, in my opinion, needs to be future-proofed.
I mean, that's certainly an ask of the APG. We would hope that it has the support of the Communities Committee, and we certainly hope then ultimately it is the support of the Minister, Morris. So, I mean, that's certainly something we want to see and hope to see, and we feel we need to see.
Chair, final comment. During my time I've been picked up in the bookies, I saw a lot of people gambling, which I could never understand. So I do know the effect that it has on people, and it's not a good effect. So I wish the group all the best going forward.
Thank you, Morris. And Melissa, please.
Thank you, Rolf Lig. You're all very welcome, and as I say, being a member of the committee and that as well too, I'm only but too familiar with the work that's been carried up to date. Just 2 points. Philip, you've actually alluded to the very fact that in terms of legislation, there's that larger piece of work that the foundations and that should be laid, say, within this mandate in order to bring forward legislation in the next mandate then in relation to gambling. And I think that you're exactly right there that we do need to make that start. But in addition, I get the impression, is it that like gambling in itself is a devolved matter to the extent that where we can introduce our own bill in relation to, we'll say, the levy. And I think that maybe that could be one of the very first steps of something that we can be proactive about at the present time. Or are we dependent and waiting on a legislation in Britain and that to give us the permission to go ahead and impose that levy? So that if it is devolved to that extent where we can progress it, what would you see as being, we'll say, the impediments or the hurdles in relation to that at present?
Well, I mean, we can certainly progress it with regard to land-based gambling establishments. So, I mean, our call is that the Minister should implement a gambling levy within this mandate. So, I mean, that's something that can be done here. It is devolved and should be done with regard to the levy for online. As I say, we and 3 ministers have jointly wrote along with ourselves to ask that we get a share of that levy from across the water. You know, what future legislation will ensure from a levy for regard to here, we will see as we move forward. But at the minute, we can introduce a levy for land-based gambling operators.
How do we go about doing that?
It's within the legislation passed, so the Minister just needs to bring that forward.
Where's the Minister to do it?
Yep.
So.
Thank you. Thank you. Marisa, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so listen, very useful information. I want to thank the APG for the work and for the presentation here today and for informing members of the issues as you see them, and that will hopefully remain an ongoing piece of work. We will consider now some follow-up actions, but I want to thank you to Gormila Moyagav Ilig for your presentation and your attendance today.
Can we thank the committee for inviting us and for their continued support? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, there's a few, just to pick up on any follow-up actions there, and there's one, I suppose, certainly that jumps out to me is around the prevalence reporting and the need. Now, I know we did raise it with officials before, and they said they were, I think they said they were happy to consider that, but I think maybe more formally we should ask the department to indicate if there are any plans to increase the regularity of that prevalence reporting to ensure that we're staying across the issues. Would members be agreed that we
have offered to brief? They've
offered to brief. Okay. Yeah. Let's pick up then in terms of the briefing. The other one I think then is that ask around the land-based levy. I think it would be important that is progressed. Would members have any views? Go ahead, Ciara.
Well, just on that, obviously the Minister updated there in our briefing papers this week that it won't be done by the 31st of March of 2025, that they are working on it. So I suppose there is a commitment from the Department and the Minister. So I suppose it's just having that reassurance regarding timelines within this mandate, that the Department is confident with the resources they have, with the work that they've already done. Is there a time scale as to how they move forward in relation to the legislative framework and all around it?
This isn't in relation to the levy.
No, this is in relation to the levy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Timeline.
Specifically on the
just specifically on that, yeah.
Yeah. Kelly?
And Chair, just to follow on from what Ciara's saying there, the levy was supposed to be introduced to help to provide money to protect vulnerable people and people who are addicted to gambling. Because that levy hasn't been progressed yet, how is the Department ensuring that any protections are invested in or put in place? So if we could just clarify that with the Department, because the longer they take, then the less investment is going into that prevention services. So while you have Bet Aware and or whatever it's called, we don't have that coming in here. So what's going on?
Yeah, and given the scale of the challenge for the Department as well as all of ourselves as an Assembly, and the fact that the substantial legislation is mooted to be running, would need to run to 350 clauses, probably the largest piece of legislation ever to come to this Assembly. I think it's important to get a sense from the Department as to what the staffing, the human resource plans are, so it doesn't sit in abeyance until a new mandate, that there is preparatory work going on across a range of the issues there. But I think we need to maybe check, is the department looking at that issue, if members agree?
See, that's my concern as well, because obviously the code of practice, that's been reduced, and it may be due to, you know, the implications and the resources, etc., to follow through on some of those areas within the code of practice. So even, you know, it's the legislation and our intentions in bringing it forward for the code of practice has already been reduced and maybe diluted, whilst we should be actually strengthening, building upon and planning for the next mandate.
Yeah.
So that's why I raised that concern. Just what the other thing, it's regarding the online levy and stuff, and obviously the British government. I didn't want to. I knew they were leaving. I didn't want to ask, but has there been any financial analysis if we were to receive a dividend from the online levy? What would that be, and what would be the implications of that? Because that could be quite huge. Because we have noted, it has been noted there through the department that the land-based levy would be quite small in its insignificance as to what it could actually do across the north. But I'd be interested to know, has there been any analysis regarding what would be the potential dividend that the north could receive through the online levy? Because I think that could potentially be a catalyst for moving forward regarding the regulatory board, etc., etc.
I was just going to say, Chair, I can't remember if it was an individual party presentation or one to the committee the last time. There was a lady came to see us about, she was from the tic-tac-toe people within, racing venues.
Yeah.
And I think she had comparative figures on the online compared to what they would lift in racetracks compared to the online one. And it was millions just for Northern Ireland now. So I'm wondering, was that, I don't know whether that was a committee presentation or she picked us all out and got us all individually. But I know that the industry itself are very frustrated that they were going to be asked to pay a levy and the online guys weren't, and that's why they were providing the figures. So there must be something there. I must actually dig into my paperwork and see if I can find that. Yeah.
Okay, and go ahead, Brian.
Do we have officials coming out on this? Is that we saying?
They have offered a briefing in their last written correspondence. It included an offered a brief, and we were anticipating a briefing whenever they had marshalled their most recent prevalence study. Yeah. So that was referred to when officials were here. I just don't have a date for that yet, but I can follow that up.
Yeah, no, I think we should ask. I mean, in the meantime, we should be asking for updates on all these matters. The request for Northern Ireland's share of the online levy. Is the gambling levy advancing in Northern Ireland as enabled by the 2022 PARS? The gambling prevalence survey due to be published early 2025, is that? Can we receive a copy of that? And the code of practice, I'm not sure, is the code of practice in effect, or is it still just a draft out for consultation? So just that process of introducing the code of practice.
Well, I have to say the APG has a number of asks there which sum up a lot of what we're talking about. Would members be content that we write to the department in support of those asks from the APG? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, members. Yeah. Nothing else then on that. Yeah. Okay. That's useful and important work, I have to say, and we'll need to keep that one under review. So moving on to agenda item 12 is the forward work programme, a copy of which is in your pack there at page 1533. Can I draw members' attention please to the information session scheduled for next Tuesday, 21st, in relation to universal credit, and I'd like as many members as possible to come along to that session, hear from officials managing all of those universal credit operations.
Is that just for the committee?
Yep,
Right.
That's an informal information session from the department on universal credit.
Fortunately, next Tuesday lunchtime, I've never seen so many APGs and events taking place in one lunchtime. But anyway,
there is a lot. It's in here. In that slot. It is increasingly difficult to find time for many of these issues, I have to say.
About 6 different things all in the one lunchtime. But anyway,
Sean.
Yeah, it's just in relation to the forward work plan, not about the.
Okay, so we'll come to you in a second. So, so go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, it's just about the arts event on the 13th of February. It's just really, I suppose, to check in and see where we're at with that, whether decisions had been made in terms of attendees, or I suppose how the event was going to work in terms of, I suppose, facilitation, just really to see if there's any further information.
So committee received a paper just before Christmas and agreed we'd go ahead with planning, and the route is that we've just this week launched a survey and sent it to that wider group. All of the members were listed in the previous paper, so there's an extensive group being asked for their views and input, and they're being asked to nominate a representative because of the constraints of the size of the gallery room here, to attend on the 13th. So we're canvassing for views now and opinions, and then a smaller group will attend in person, and members agreed the cafe style type format, and set questions which will be facilitated at tables. So that has gone live this week. It will remain open for a few weeks, and then we'll close it just in advance of the actual event, so we have information and data there.
And we'll get a briefing, a more up-to-date briefing and capture of that in due course,
Yes.
in advance of the...
Or the event.
Okay, anything else in terms of forward work that any members wish to highlight or flag? No? Okay, members content then with the forward work programme as drafted. Agenda item 13, any other business? Do members have any other business today?
Yeah, it was just a small point. I suppose to thank you as well for the support for the Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network. I know that was just a really difficult situation before Christmas, so to thank yourself for that support, and also to thank the department, I suppose, for progressing that, and also to congratulate them. Yesterday they announced a massive piece of funding from the lottery, which would not have been made possible had their funding not come through from the department. So I think there's potentially issues to be ironed out still, but yeah, just a really key organisation that we had to save.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Sean. And I have to say, I also welcome the department's commitment to work very closely with them and to get that resolved. They are a very, very important group in our society. Yep. Okay, thank you. Any other business members? No? Okay then, final agenda items 14, date, time and location of the next meeting. And our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 23rd of January 2025 here in room 29, Parliament Buildings. Meeting is now adjourned, members. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Committee Room 29, Sound.